hybrid hearing on the Committee on Civil and Human Rights. Please silence all electronic devices at this time. If you have any question, please raise your hand, and one of us, as Sergeant at Arms, will kindly assist you. Please, at no time, do not approach the dais. Once again, thank you for your kind cooperation. Chair, we're ready to begin.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Natasha Williams, and I serve as chair to the Committee on Civil and Human Rights. I want to start off by thanking everyone joining us for this morning's hearing. Today, we are focusing on a very important topic, the implementation of the city's 2022 charter amendments to promote racial equity. These amendments came about as a result of a thoughtful, multi-year process commenced in 2021 under then Mayor Bill de Blasio, who established the Racial Justice Commission, or RJC for short. RJC examined historical and present-day racial inequities in New York City, and in its findings, it recommended revisions to the city's charter to help eliminate structural barriers to racial equity. This committee held a hearing on RJC's proposed ballot measures with the goal of learning more about their process for identifying structural barriers, their engagement with experts and impacted communities, and the conclusions drawn that led to their proposals. These proposed amendments were passed by referendum by an overwhelming majority of New Yorkers during the November 2022 elections. They officially took effect in December of 2022. Now, a year and a half later, this committee is looking to learn more about their implementation and progress so far. The amendments are as follows. First, the addition of a preamble, which serves as a statement of values to the city charter to guide government in its decision-making and understanding its duties to all New Yorkers. Second, the charter now requires a biennial process of citywide and agency planning and reporting with the goal of eliminating racial inequity, also known as a citywide racial equity plan. The racial equity planning process was developed in time to coincide with the budget planning cycle in order to ensure the city's budget aligns with and supports New Yorkers' equity priorities. Lastly, the city was required to create an Office of Racial Equity and a Commission on Racial Equity, now known as MOERJ and CORE, respectively. MOERJ is designated as the lead agency for racial equity and is tasked with working across city agencies to improve equity in government operations and planning. CORE is designed to lead engagement with communities affected by racial and other forms of inequity across the city and to champion their voices in the halls of government. While the First Amendment, the addition of a preamble, has been completed, the mandated work of MOERJ and CORE is ongoing. While I understand and appreciate that such work takes great effort, time, and diligence, there have been significant delays overall. For example, although the charter required the first preliminary racial equity plan was due on January 16, 2024, in early 2024, MOERJ published a new timeline and states on its website that the racial equity planning process kicked off with agencies between March and May of 2024. And that draft agency racial equity plans are currently under review. A finalized citywide racial equity plan is expected to be published in November 2024. As a result of the new timeline, this year's racial equity planning process does not align with the ongoing budget process for fiscal year 2025, despite the intent of the charter amendment. With respect to CORE, the charter states that commissioners would commence their work on August 1st, 2023. However, severe delays in appointments did not allow for their work to begin at the designated time. In fact, 11 out of 14 appointments were not announced until May 13th, 2024, with another 2 appointments announced only 3 days ago on June 24th. As it stands, there still remains 1 vacancy remaining on the commission, nearly a year after the start date required by the charter. While I greatly look forward to hearing about all of the work that is ongoing, it does not lessen the importance of identifying and tackling any roadblocks that may have or are anticipated to come up. We will also be hearing some legislation today. Intro 833, sponsored by Public Advocate Jamani Williams, will require the placement of an informational sign near the intersection of Wall and Pearl Streets in Manhattan to mark the site of New York's first slave market. Resolution 108, sponsored by Councilmember Hudson, recognizes the duty of the federal government to develop and implement a transgender Bill of Rights. Resolution 280, sponsored by Councilmember Lewis, designating November 30th annually as my soror, Shirley Chisholm Day. And lastly, my own bill, Intro 471, which would establish a New York City Freedom Trail Task Force, a bill originally held by my colleague, Councilmember Marte. I will now turn it over to our committee counsel, who I also would like to thank for all of their hard work in preparing for today's hearing to administer the oath. Oh, yes, and we also have opening statements, so we'll do opening statements before we swear everyone in, and I want to acknowledge that we've been joined by Councilmember Riley, Marte, Lewis, Hudson is somewhere, and Joseph. And I'll turn over to Councilmember Lewis.
Thank you, Chair Williams, and good morning, everyone. Chair Williams, thank you for your continued support in recognizing foundational leaders who have strived to make our city and our nation more equitable for all. And I'm grateful to see my bill, Resolution 280, being heard today, a resolution that would designate November 30th annually as the Shirley Chisholm Day in New York City, in the city of New York. It recognizes her immense contributions as an educator, activist, and elected official who served the people of New York City with passion and dignity. Shirley Chisholm was a trailblazer. In 1964, she became the second Black person ever elected to the New York State Assembly. Just 4 years later, she made history as the first Black woman elected to the United States House of Representatives, representing New York's 12th Congressional District for 7 terms from 1969 to 1983. During her tenure, she was a founding member of the Congressional Black Caucus. As someone myself born to Caribbean immigrants and a council with a large population of Caribbean Americans, it is fitting to honor Shirley Anita St. Hill Chisholm, born in Brooklyn on November 30th, 1924, to Charles St. Hill, a factory worker from Guyana, and Ruby Sealy St. Hill, a seamstress from Barbados. Shirley's famous quote, "If they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair," exemplifies her grit and determination. Despite facing stereotypes and prejudice, she tirelessly fought for equal rights. Establishing Shirley Chisholm Day is not only a gesture of respect and gratitude towards her groundbreaking achievements, but also means to promote inclusivity, inspire future leaders, and foster a deeper understanding of the importance of equality and social justice in our community. It commemorates a remarkable leader whose impact continues to resonate and inspire generations. Shirley Chisholm has certainly inspired many from the Black diaspora and many future generations to come, particularly women of color, to pursue leadership roles in policy, advocacy, and social justice. Her courage, determination, and resilience in challenging status quo serve as a powerful example of how individuals can affect change, positive change, despite facing adversity. I am excited to see this bill come to fruition. I want to thank the committee and our chair for allowing me to speak today during the hearing. Thank you, Chair Williams.
Thank you. Any other, good? Okay. I'll turn it over to you, and then
Chair.
yeah, I know she's not ready. So we'll turn over to you, and then when Councilmember Hudson is ready, we will pause to also hear her opening remarks or statements.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jessica Boulay, I am counsel to the Committee on Civil and Human Rights. Today, we will hear testimony first from the Mayor's Office of Equity and Racial Justice, and then from the Commission on Racial Equity. Joining us for our first panel, we have Commissioner Sadia Sherman and Deputy Commissioner Dabash Nagash. Panelists, if you could please raise your right hands. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this committee, and to respond honestly to council member questions?
I do.
Thank you so much. All right. If we want to, Councilmember Hudson, if you would like to, all right, before we start testimony.
Oh, I thought you were going to call me, but...
And now we'll turn it over
Sorry.
to Councilmember Hudson for remarks on her resolution.
Thank you so much, Chair. And though it's Pride Month in New York City and our community is out celebrating our identities, we're also raising our collective voices to protest systemic oppression of LGBTQIA+ people in New York City and across the world. In New York City, we've seen our transgender and gender nonconforming neighbors come under attack. We've had attempts to ban trans-inclusive books and prohibit trans girls and women from playing sports right in our backyard. We purport to be an inclusive, welcoming city, but that's not the case for transgender and gender nonconforming people. It's even worse across the nation. Last year, at least 32 transgender and gender expansive people were murdered, half of whom were Black trans women: Amber Minor in Missouri, Amiri Reed in Ohio, LaKendra Andrews in Louisiana, Ashia Davis in Michigan, and Ashley Burton in Georgia, to name a few. So the bill that is being heard today is of utmost importance, and I thank you.
Thank you. And with that, we can turn it over to you, Commissioner.
Thank you. Chair Williams, member of the Committee on Civil and Human Rights, distinguished members of the City Council, and the public, good morning. I'm Sadia Sherman, New York City's Chief Equity Officer and Commissioner of the New York City Mayor's Office of Equity and Racial Justice. I am pleased to be joined today by Debash Nagash, Deputy Commissioner, and other members of the MOERJ team. Thank you for the opportunity to provide an update on our efforts to implement the historic racial justice ballot measures New Yorkers passed in late 2022. Our team has been hard at work uplifting these mandates with an eye towards transforming government towards racial equity and justice. I want to begin by acknowledging that this hearing is taking place on the heels of Juneteenth. We are all here today discussing the implementation of racial justice charter amendments because of those who came before us, many whose names we don't know, people who suffered and fought for freedom, demanded their humanity be recognized, organized, and formed many traditions that endure today. Their legacy is a powerful reminder of our collective responsibility to speak up and fight for justice. That spirit lives on in so many who've laid the groundwork for today's discussion, including the former staff of the Racial Justice Commission and the commissioners who, with input from communities, examined structural racism in our city and put forward ballot measures aimed at dismantling these barriers and promoting racial equity. And my fellow New Yorkers, who overwhelmingly voted to center racial equity in city governance and empowered us to carry this work forward. As a lifelong New Yorker, I was proud to witness this important moment for our city. In recognition of the history and the people who have brought us to this day, I wish to read a passage from the preamble of our city charter. We, the people of New York City, united in our resolve to build a just and equitable city for all, recognize the efforts of those New Yorkers, past and present, who fought for racial equity and social justice, honor the contributions of those New Yorkers who suffered in the name of freedom, and acknowledge all who fought, struggled, and dreamed for a better life and a better city. Together, we stand on their shoulders as we move boldly towards a brighter tomorrow for ourselves, our children, and future generations. Thank you for your attention, and with that said, I'm pleased to update the Council. As highlighted in my testimony before the Council last September, the new preamble of the City Charter introduces a groundbreaking set of foundational values designed to guide the operation of city government and inform and shape how the city carries out its duties, obligations, and authorities. This preamble casts a vision for a multiracial democracy where we affirm that diversity is our strength, acknowledge the harms of the past, and boldly commit to building an equitable future for all. The preamble urges government to uphold three core values: that we justly value all talents and contributions, that we ensure the conditions of thriving for every person, and embrace vigilance, remedy, and reconstruction. In crafting these ballot proposals, the former Racial Justice Commission spent months engaging the public in examining the root causes of inequity. From our perspective, the three resulting proposals were decidedly focused on shifting the direction of government rather than addressing any single issue area. With that charge, we have oriented our work around these foundational values and the broader vision of our city's preamble, presenting a monumental opportunity for us as public servants to rethink and reshape how we serve New Yorkers. As MOERJ leads implementation of these new charter amendments, we endeavor to translate these values into actionable measures, ultimately institutionalizing progress across agencies and establishing new norms within city government. The charter calls for the city to create an Office of Racial Equity and an independent commission on racial equity. In October 2023, MOERJ, which is the city's Office on Racial Equity, was announced alongside the Commission on Racial Equity. Leading up to the launch of these two new entities, our office spearheaded months of planning work across the administration to identify and secure fiscal resources, outline preliminary staffing structures, began to establish personnel and other administrative systems necessary to hire staff, and ensure a solid and sustainable operational footing, all while continuing equity work underway prior to passing the ballot measures. Amid a challenging fiscal environment, MOERJ and CORE were among the new needs met in the city's FY24 budget, with the administration affirming its commitment to building the dedicated infrastructure needed for long-term racial equity work within city government. As we continue to thoughtfully grow our team and develop processes and systems for our nascent agency, we are keeping MOERJ's long-term goals in sight to ensure the city has a strong equity infrastructure for generations to come. While continuing to operationally stand up our new office and implement existing work, we also convened an advisory board of diverse leaders across the city and nation to provide high-level guidance on implementing the ballot measures and transforming government towards racial equity and justice. Drawing on their significant experience implementing and scaling strategies across government systems, the advisory board has been instrumental in helping our team build a strategic framework for advancing structural reform through the racial equity planning process and other areas of work overseen by our office. We extend our deepest gratitude to the advisory board members for their service and unwavering commitment to building an equitable New York City. As we advance work that is long-term in nature, MOERJ has also remained focused on collaborating with partners to invest in and implement strategies to address the needs of New Yorkers in real time. This is including but not limited to over $6 million invested in new and expanded services for LGBTQ+ New Yorkers that builds on and expands the work of the NYC Unity Project within MOERJ. Partnering with SBS to launch merchant organizing grants to support diverse communities, many hard hit by the pandemic, including building vibrant neighborhood business communities and commercial corridors. Working with our internal task force on racial inclusion and equity and community groups to identify existing and new strategies that can be targeted to help address long-term disparities in the Bronx. And collaborating with the city and public partners on the citywide expansion of the Save for College program, New York City's Universal College Savings Program. The charter requires the city to produce a citywide racial equity plan, inclusive of individual agency racial equity plans on a biannual basis. Per the city charter, the city's racial equity plan should encompass outcome measures, short and long-term goals, and strategies to reduce racial disparities. The Commission on Racial Equity ensures community voice is brought into the process, proposing community equity priorities and outcome indicators for possible inclusion in the plan. The MOERJ team has been diligently working to roll out the city's inaugural citywide racial equity plan. We have designed a planning process that is first and foremost focused on structural reform and moving government towards equity and justice in greater unison. To get at the heart of this, our planning process is focused on the core levers of government: budget, staffing, procurement, service delivery, and policymaking, to name a few. This is not a mere compliance exercise, but an opportunity for the city to pursue long-term transformation. Agencies are examining their priorities relative to the foundational values, assessing disparity data and community equity priorities, and developing short, midterm, and long-term goals and strategies that are responsive. Over the past months, our team has worked on multiple fronts to ensure a successful racial equity planning process. We have briefed senior leaders, identified planning teams across agencies, developed planning tools, led full-day training workshops. We are providing continuous support to agencies throughout the process through dedicated office hours and one-on-one technical assistance. This is the first time our city has taken on a racial equity planning process at this scale. Together, we are building a shared understanding of structural inequity, operating with a common set of values, and building the uniform tools and processes needed to upend the way structural racism impacts our city. Agencies have enthusiastically embraced this process. This fall, we look forward to sharing a preliminary plan with the public and a final plan thereafter. Once the plan is released, our work continues, with MOERJ quickly shifting towards implementation and working closely with agencies to advance critical goals, track progress, and make continuous improvements to eliminate racial disparities and promote fairness for all New Yorkers. Simultaneous to the citywide racial equity planning process, we are also working to produce the city's first true cost of living measure. As outlined in the charter, the New York City True Cost of Living measure will establish what it costs to live in our city with dignity, without consideration of public, private, or informal assistance. Recognizing the inadequacy of the federal poverty measure, the True Cost of Living measure will move beyond basic calculations of poverty to capture what it costs to meet basic needs, weather emergencies, and have the economic stability needed to plan for one's future. This measure will analyze costs across various household sizes, age groups, and essential areas of need to create a comprehensive understanding of what it takes to thrive in our city. As one of the first cities to produce a measure of this type, New York City's True Cost of Living measure can help inform state and national policy priorities and help us further advocate for the needs of working people in our city. We are committed to getting this right and taking the necessary steps to develop the measure carefully, including leveraging local and national research. We look forward to providing an update later this year and sharing our full report in 2025. We recognize the painful history of slavery that endures throughout our city and country, and the importance of highlighting that often underappreciated history and the resilience of New York City's Black communities. We are proud of the administration's work happening on this front. For instance, earlier this month, the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission and Mayor Adams announced More Than a Brook, a Brooklyn Abolitionist Heritage Walk, an interactive audio tour exploring Brooklyn's history related to the National Abolitionist Movement and the Underground Railroad. In this spirit, the city looks forward to working with the council to advance Intro 1150 by Councilmember Marte in relation to establishing a New York City Freedom Trail. Furthermore, the city, led by the Department of Transportation, commits to installing or working with a third party to install a new informational sign to mark the site of New York's first slave market near the intersection of Wall Street and Pearl Street. DOT looks forward to continued discussions with the public advocate and historians to identify appropriate location and content for the sign in response to Intro 833 presented by Public Advocate Williams. At a time when diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives are under attack nationally, our city has an opportunity to demonstrate how government guided by racial equity and justice works best for all in our city and therefore across our nation. Over the coming months, we will steadfastly advance these major government reform efforts while continuing to roll out new equity initiatives from our office. Recently, we were proud to announce the launch of NYC Her Future, a new companion office to the Young Men's Initiative focused on developing programs and addressing disparities experienced by young women and girls. Furthermore, as we close out Pride Month, we are thrilled to continue sharing investments through the NYC Unity Project, including the recently announced expansion of the Family Acceptance Program focused on LGBTQ+ youth. Thank you again for the opportunity to discuss our efforts to create a more just city. We welcome your questions.
Thank you, and thank you for your testimony. So I have a few questions on appointments and staffing. So Commissioner, prior to your appointment as Chief Equity Officer for MOERJ in October 2023, you had already been serving as Commissioner for the Mayor's Office of Equity, known as MO, since May 2022. Is that correct? I think that's correct.
Yes, that's correct.
It was not until October 2023, nearly 1 year after the charter amendments took effect, that the mayor formally established MOERJ. During that interim year, can you tell us about what preparations, if any, the mayor's Office of Equity was able to undertake to prepare for MOERJ's launch?
Sure. So between that period between establishing and transitioning to the Mayor's Office of Equity and Racial Justice, there were a number of steps that we took to really make sure that we were setting up a new office. And just to give some context, our transition from the Office of Equity to the Office of Equity and Racial Justice was not a turnkey operation. It literally is standing up a new agency, right? New budget, new hiring systems, new civil service titles, et cetera, to really make sure that we're standing up a fully functioning team. So our first step was making sure that we secured the budget in the next fiscal year. We spent a lot of time doing strategic planning, building out staffing models, as well as prospective staffing models for the Commission on Racial Equity as well. Securing the budget and making sure we're securing the lines, building the systems to even post for jobs, developing the job descriptions and posting for those as well as bringing in experts to help advise us on the overall framework for implementation. So I shared that we launched an advisory board that was in April 2023. That advisory board included former racial justice commissioners, as well as former city government leaders, former mayors, other folks who've been crucial to change management efforts in city government. And so we worked with them and had their advisement during this period. This is all while still, of course, carrying on the day-to-day work of our office.
Okay, and this is kind of like a similar question, but outside of the preparation work you did to stand up the new office, can you share how this new office builds on work that was already being done in the previous office?
Sure. So, we are the Office of Racial Equity, but we are, the Office of Equity and Racial Justice to really reflect all the other disciplines that are still part of our office. So while we are carrying forward the charter mandates, we still include the NYC Unity Project, NYC Her Future, the Commission on Gender Equity, right, the Young Men's Initiative, and all the other units that were originally part of our team. So that work has still continued. We still have the program management portfolio that we oversee, and I included, some of those programs and initiatives. Those are still ongoing. And so there's lots of connectivity between the work, but obviously the work that is reflected in the charter is brand new to the office and the city.
Okay, and I just want to acknowledge that we've been joined by Councilmember Salamanca. Can you tell us, if at all, can you share if you've added new work streams compared to the work that Mo was doing to comply with the 2022 Charter Amendment? So if there's anything in addition to your previous work.
Oh, absolutely. So, I mean, the racial equity planning process in itself is an all-encompassing work stream that really is encompassing, much of the focus and effort of our office, pulling in folks from across our office to make sure that we execute it. So this is, designing racial equity planning tools, training, curriculum, working with agencies one-on-one, right? It's a whole new set of activities and responsibilities that we have as an office that didn't exist prior to the charter mandates. That's just one example. Obviously, I shared, the research and the work that we have underway around the true cost of living, as well as many of the other efforts that the charter calls upon us. Obviously, in this initial year, a lot of our focus has been the racial equity plan and the planning process, and that has pulled in all members of our team, myself included, to really make sure that we're focused on that effort.
Okay, I have some questions on the racial equity plan, but I will stick to questions around appointment staffing timeline for right now. So several aspects of MOERJ's mandate, including with respect to the citywide racial equity plan, have been significantly delayed. To what extent was the Mayor's Office of Equity able to prepare for the racial equity planning process prior to your formal appointment as Chief Equity Officer? And to what extent were these delays inevitable given MOERJ's late launch in 2023?
Sure. So I would acknowledge, obviously, that we shared an updated timeline in January, acknowledging that these are late, and certainly it's not a reflection of the seriousness that we see with this. Is actually the opposite, right? We see this as very important, and are making sure that we do it correctly. And so, even in our role as the Office of Equity, a lot of the planning work started because this is again, as we learn from the work of the Racial Justice Commission, really a focus on building the foundations to shift government. A lot of the early planning efforts started in concert with our advisory board in April 2023, where we built out, various theories of change, different models for racial equity planning. We began to think through KPIs, structures for the plan, templates, et cetera, so that even as we moved into expanded Mayor's Office of Equity and Racial Justice, we had some foundation and some footing to start that work. Were it not for that work, even in the previous iteration of our office, we wouldn't be where we are today. And so that was instrumental to making sure that we were able to move forward and work with agencies in the fashion that we are now.
Okay, thank you. And I just wanted to know, like, I know I'm totally going off script, but as I was thinking about the work and some of the delays, I will say that it is a very large system. New York City is very large, and it is a very large system that was not built for equity. And so I was thinking a lot about how the intents and the timelines probably may not have been accurate from the start to endeavor in this important work, but really wanting to understand what has been the cause of the delays, because we know that accountability and really working towards making our city more equitable is important. So thank you for sharing a little bit about your timeline. So in terms of staffing levels, how many staff members are currently employed within MOERJ, and how do these staffing levels compare to staffing levels of MO in October 2023?
Sure. So currently we have 10 people on staff, 5 people in our pipeline, meaning folks who are in some form of vetting and waiting for a start date. For our remaining positions, we are all in the recruitment, interview, hiring process somewhere with those roles, but we hope to be at 15 people pretty soon with the next folks starting. In comparison to MOE, and I'll defer to my deputy commissioner, we had 7 lines, I want to say, in MOE, but I would just flag that we also had shifts, right? So during the course of this process, we also had 6 people transition out of MOE as we transitioned to MOERJ. So our staffing has also been fluid, where we're hiring for new roles, but also backfilling for positions. Okay.
It's like you said it perfectly, nothing to add.
I would just add, also council member, and I know I shared this at the hearing that we had on pay equity not too long ago. Staffing is our greatest priority. I think I speak for myself and our deputy commissioner. Nobody wants our team more fully staffed than us, for sure. And so, we are focused squarely on that. We're advertising online, we're on LinkedIn, we're on, Idealist, a number of sites. Will be at the city's hiring halls. And so we're really all hands on deck to try to make sure that we find the right people and we do it thoughtfully, but really build a strong foundation for this team.
Awesome. Are there any open vacancies? Is the 5 in the pipe the vacancies that you mentioned? Or is there separate lines that are current vacancies that are not included in the 15? And if so, are they currently any ongoing hiring process? You kind of answered that question, so I guess if you could just share what the vacancies are, if you have them.
Sure, I can jump in on that. So we have a total of 38. Well, when we're fully staffed, we're at 38. So
38?
Yes. Mm-hmm. So as we bring on these additional 5 folks, we'll be at about 15, and then we're in parallel continuing to hire for additional positions separately. And I'm happy to share a full list after the hearing, if that's all right. We have several of those positions posted as well, including a general counsel role.
Did you say 38?
Correct.
Okay.
And I should mention that includes positions that will directly work on the racial equity planning and the charter amendments, but it also includes positions related to the work that Commissioner Sherman mentioned for NYC Her Future, which is a new unit in the office.
Okay. I think I'm confused, but it may be me and not you, so please allow me to clarify. So you mentioned 10 staff, 5 in the pipe, and then you said a total of 38. Can you explain to me the weirdness of, I'm pretty sure, the city's hiring process, the 10, the 5, the 38, like what is that?
Sure, absolutely. So the 38 is just the total within our office.
That includes like the different commissions and...
That includes all of, yes, this is, yeah, I
Help
understand
me
the confusion.
understand, I'm not in the inside.
So that includes all of the personnel lines within the Mayor's Office of Equity and Racial Justice within our mayoral agency. And then it also includes some additional, so that includes the staff that work on the racial equity planning process, right? Our office was, alongside the Commission on Racial Equity, was funded in fiscal year 24 for that expansion. So it includes all of those lines, but it also includes positions to support the new unit, the NYC Her Future that the commissioner mentioned as well. So it includes positions that are supporting
Right,
the
do you have,
racial
like-
equity planning process, but also positions supporting the office as a whole.
Because you have like different commissions and initiatives, and so the 38 encompasses all of the things.
So, sure. So it's a little complicated, and we can also follow up if it's helpful
Okay.
too, but just big picture, as Deputy Commissioner Nagash shared, that includes everyone who's within this new mayoral unit. The new mayoral unit, right, this new budget unit includes everyone tied to the racial equity mandates and the new team that was created for NYC Her Future. The offices that report to me as Chief Equity Officer, like Commission on Gender Equity, Young Men's Initiative, for instance, all sit in different budget areas and are part of our overall team. And so we're not speaking to those teams, right? So we can also give you the big picture of all of our various teams that report into me, but for the newly created positions, those are the 38. And of those 38, we have 10 incumbents, 5 in the pipeline, and we're hiring on the rest of the lines.
Okay, so the vacancies make up like pretty much 38 minus 15.
Exactly.
Thank you. So how are staffing levels projected to change in FY 2025? And I guess if I could guess based off of what you've just answered, and you can just tell me if I'm right or wrong, you would be seeking to fulfill the full 38 positions. There are no additional positions. It would just be a fully functioning office with all 38 positions
Exactly.
filled.
We
Okay.
move forward with the same head count.
Okay. And at the end of FY 2025, does MOERJ project that it will be adequately staffed to fully carry out its full mandate under the charter, or is MOERJ projected to continue ramping up into FY 26?
Our goal is to be fully staffed within FY '25. We're aiming to do that by Q2 of the fiscal year, if not earlier. Again, headcount fluctuates, people separate, people join, but we're aggressively hiring.
Okay. So was MOERJ involved in the selection or vetting process for core commissioners? So deviating a bit to the selection process of core, and then I have some budget questions.
Sure. So the process for core commissioners is led by the Mayor's Office of Appointments. While we certainly, can recommend commissioners, they lead that process and work on all mayoral appointments.
Okay. So about the budget, back to staffing and personnel budgets, was the Mayor's Office of Equity able to undertake any preparations for MOERJ staffing efforts prior to your appointment as Chief Equity Officer? I believe you kind of answered that. You mentioned that a part of your preparation was figuring out budgets and staff lines.
Sure. We also prepared, job descriptions for all of the roles, did the strategic planning. We also shared, preliminary job descriptions for core to consider as they came on board, and also, worked to stand up some just basic infrastructure so that there were lines, seating, et cetera, available for the commission when the commission was activated as well.
The charter states that the budget appropriation for CORE's expenses during each fiscal year shall be not less than an amount sufficient to fund personnel service costs for full-time and part-time personnel necessary to implement the charter mandated requirements for the commission. What was MOERJ's budget for personnel in FY '24?
I will turn to Deputy Commissioner Nagash.
For FY '24 is $4.3 million.
Was MOERJ able to use all of its resources allocated in the budget for personnel expenses in FY '24?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I just couldn't hear it.
Yeah, just wanted to know if you were able to exhaust the $4.3 million this fiscal year.
Yes, so no, we were not. We had some savings for the reasons that Commissioner Sherman mentioned. We were standing up the office. The office was announced in the second quarter of the fiscal year. And as we were standing up the office and posting jobs, that was happening within the second quarter of the fiscal year as well. So all of that funding was not exhausted, and we had some savings.
Okay. And in reference to your operational budget, what was MOERJ's total funding for OTPS in FY '24? And was this sufficient to cover necessary supplies, equipment, utilities, and et cetera?
Yes, so for FY24, it was about 600,000. It was enough in that fiscal year. Again, since we're still standing up the office, there's still a lot that we need to do. But we evaluate our budget on an annual basis, and of course, work with our colleagues if anything else is needed.
Okay. Did MOERJ ever reach out to OMB to discuss budget needs? And if so, could you share a response?
Sure.
A response from OMB. Like, have you had conversations with them about your budget? Are you fine with your budget? Could you share any insight around your budget?
Yes, we work very closely with our colleagues at OMB on establishing the budget back in prior to the start of FY24 and ensuring that the needs of the office are met. We consistently work with them, between fiscal years, right, as well, between the fiscal year, the beginning and the end, of the fiscal year as well, to just ensure that needs are met, and if adjustments need to be made, that we're connecting with them directly about it. We also ensure that they're very familiar with our work. We've briefed the staff on the charter mandates and the work that we aim to do to also ensure the work that we're doing, the direction we're headed is understood.
Thank you. Do you think you have adequate office space for your current staffing levels and projected staffing levels?
Do we currently have, sorry?
Enough adequate office space?
Okay.
Really, I'm interested in the projected staffing levels because you are projected to go up ×2. So do you feel like you have adequate office space for your projected staffing needs?
Yeah, we've been working with our colleagues at DCAS and others across the administration to identify additional space. We have a space currently that will fit additional staff members that are in our pipeline, but we recognize that we'll need more space for staff coming on board this fiscal year. So we've been working on identifying additional space.
In terms of resources, MOERJ did not participate in a council preliminary or executive budget hearing this year. How did MOERJ determine its budget needs for the coming year? Did MOERJ request any additional or new resources for FY 2025?
Sure. I mean, so I can just jump in and then I'll. So we, as Deputy Commissioner Nagash shared, we work with OMB going through each budget cycle. Our head count is remaining the same into the next year, and it's sufficient for our needs, as well as our OTPS is relatively the same. And so I know the budget is still being finalized as we speak, but at least in terms of what was shared in exec, we're about at the same levels, and I think that's consistent for what we need at this point.
Answered these questions. What are the key operational costs that MOERJ foresees for FY 25, and are these fully reflected in the executive budget?
So outside of our personnel costs, in terms of our OTPS costs, we have some potential contracting needs that based on our projected OTPS budget, we think will be sufficient to meet. We'll need some additional capacity potentially around some of the work that we're doing on true cost of living or even our planning process. Other than that, we don't have a heavy OTPS spending need at this time, but we've been able to, again, as Deputy Commissioner Nagash shared, have conversations with OMB as we have needs that may emerge throughout the fiscal year.
Okay, a few more questions. I'm going to ask a few questions about fulfilling the mandate and get a little bit more into the racial equity plans. So one of, as you have also mentioned, the most important mandate is to lead a racial equity planning process that will result in a citywide racial equity plan. The Charter's racial equity planning schedule is meant to ensure that racial equity priorities can be considered and reflected in the budget planning process. I know I would love to see that report as a council member and also a member of B&T to make sure we are being equitable. So I'm looking forward to it. And so despite the delays in the formal racial equity planning process, has MOERJ been able to engage in the city's budget process for FY 2025?
So outside of the needs for our office or programs that our office is connected to, we haven't been part of, the overarching budget negotiations, but we do know that going into the next budget cycle, the city will have a citywide racial equity plan. It will express the priorities of all agencies, but also of the city overall, right? Our office is responsible for building the citywide plan, which is a collection of those agency plans, but also the priorities of the administration. So as we go into FY26, we're excited for the city to have a plan that's strong, that's meaningful, and that will express those priorities. I would just also add, as I shared, we started an advisory board as we went through the planning process. OMB was also part of that advisory board, right? So as we thought through the racial equity planning process, how we wanted to structure it, how we designed the process, they were also partners to us to help us translate the types of tools that they need as they assess the budget, for instance, the types of uniformity of definition of process across agencies, right? So that they have some objective criteria that they can use as they actually review that plan. They've been valuable partners and thought partners in thinking through change management in city government. And so as we go into the FY26 budget cycle, I think, it's promising that the city, the council, and the city at large will have this plan to reference.
You mentioned objective criteria. Can you share, if at all, like objective criteria that has been discussed or decided upon in terms of like how to assess the budget for equity?
Sure. So we are, as we go through the racial equity planning process, as I shared, we've asked agencies to really focus on the core levers of government, right? And so, we've spent time looking at plans from other cities. We, again, spent lots of time in conversation with our advisory board. While we anticipate certainly having a plan that has a number of programs and initiatives and policies, what we're really looking for is a plan that has a number of long-term goals that are tied to how and where we allocate our resources, how we're addressing past harms, for instance, as well as how we're advancing efforts that are considered to be anti-marginalizing. And so we've worked with agencies to share clear definitions of equity, clear definitions of structural racism, of marginalization, right, to create tools that agencies can use to sort of cross-check the way in which they design programs and policies. These are not designed to be rigid, right, and to lock agencies into any particular way of doing work, but to create some uniform understanding so that when we're using the word equity, we're all operating with the same definition.
Yeah, I think from like a philosophical lens, that sounds amazing. Are you able to provide like an example of, something or like a particular item, or use an agency as an example to like help me understand how this, like the theories of what you're doing and the definitions then actually get applied to like the tangible work of a particular agency, and maybe some work they need to do to be a little bit more equitable, or fix their budgets to make sure that it reflects the necessary investments in communities that have been historically marginalized as like a particular criteria that you mentioned?
Sure, everything you shared is exactly the way in which we're focusing the plan.
That was my guess. I didn't know.
So we, so I don't want to get ahead of. We're still working with agencies to finalize plans, and I certainly don't want to get ahead of that. In this planning process, we certainly have used hypothetical fake agencies to help agencies think through their planning process. But I think big picture, what we've designed is a process where agencies are first and foremost re-examining their missions relative to these foundational values. They are then they are next setting short-term goals that are really tied to the disparities that they see in the data. So for instance, if I am an agency focused on employment and I'm seeing disparities within certain populations, right, I'm setting short-term goals to start to close those disparities, but the goals are very specific, right? The goals may be more than connecting someone to a job, but connecting someone to a job that has a living wage, for instance. I'm then moving towards midterm goals that are a little bit more transformative for my agency. So for instance, thinking through strategies to update my RFPs, for instance, to include some of the values and principles that can combat marginalization, right? And then I'm looking towards long-term goals that are potentially 10 years, right, where I'm potentially shifting my resources to specific neighborhoods or specific districts where we're seeing a disparity that's deeper than the rest of the city. And so that's the kind of exercise that agencies are going through. The charter calls on agencies to certainly have goals that can be accomplished in 2 fiscal years. So you will see a number of short-term goals. Agencies also certainly are lifting up work that's happening across this administration that's aligned, but they also are taking this deeper look at their work, their processes, and will be sharing that in the plan.
Okay, so in terms of like the work of your office, these are like literally questions off the top of my head as you're responding. So in terms of the work of your office, is it that like you provided that framework to agencies to then do their own analysis? And is it like, do you have the proper authority to hold them accountable for doing said analysis and like either reporting back up to you or like reporting back to the public? Like, I'm just interested in the workflow of that. Like, is it that you told them this is how you should be looking at the work of your agency? And then like, what obligation do they have to like turn that stuff over in timely fashion, actually implement it? And then like, what is that oversight going to look like for the agencies? Because in other hearings with other agencies that have like these oversight like powers, the agencies sometimes do their own thing and don't necessarily comply with another agency's request of them. So just wondering if you feel empowered to do the work you're doing. And then I think my first original question is like, what does that work look like? What has those conversations been? What did you give the agencies as like, was it a document, a framework? Was it a conversation? Like, how are they, what tools do they have to do this analysis? And then how are you empowered to hold them accountable for said work?
Sure. So we are empowered to design, execute, require, and really define how this plan is moving forward. We're fully empowered to doing that. There's been support across the administration, including at the very top, right, with the mayor issuing notice to agency heads, ensuring that they understand the importance of this process and the importance of committing to it. We've briefed all senior leaders, we've briefed all agency heads, and the good news is that agencies have enthusiastically participated in this process. So to your point, we have laid out tools that are, prescriptive, but still offer flexibility. We don't want to stifle innovation. We've, created training. We're providing support, technical assistance. We're receiving draft plans, and they're draft for a reason because we're going to work with agencies to bring them to final. I'm really, to your point, I've certainly been through many other city processes, and I think part of the early planning work that we did, particularly learning from other change management efforts in government as well as other cities, we did that upfront work so that we could build out a process that really brought agencies to the table in a way that they're full partners, and they've been great partners. So I think that I'm encouraged, and I think that the city will have a really strong plan. And I think the values and the priorities across the administration seem very aligned as we move forward in this process.
That's good to hear, and I guess this is more of a future question as you endeavor to be a part of the FY26 budget cycle, because as you said, we're in budget negotiations, and I think there's been plenty of times where myself, colleagues, talk about how commissioners will complain to them about OMB. And afraid of OMB, and OMB is like the end all be all. And so I almost, and I hope, and I'll be really interested in how, again, your office is empowered to be a strong voice in the budget process. And maybe you can't answer because, politics, but I'm just wondering how you feel about your role going into the next budget cycle, and if you do feel, once again, empowered to even have a strong voice within the budget cycle, and if your office is, OMB specifically, is valuing the work of your office as they seek to draft city budgets year after year.
Sure. So I don't want to speak for OMB, but I will say, again, they've been partners in this process. And I think, as we have a final plan, it will express the priorities of agencies in the administration. And I think that that's important, right? Critical information as the city budget is created. Obviously, new needs are a fraction of the city budget. And so while we know that agencies, of course, right, will propose and identify areas of need, we also are asking agencies to take a look at how they allocate their existing resources. And so that's part of the process as well as, right, the many non-monetary actions the city can take to advance equity, whether it's policy, reform, and removing impediments, et cetera.
Okay, and I just thought of another question. It's one thing in one agency to look at how they're spending their resources, in different communities with different types of demographics across the city. But in your assessments, are you also going to be looking at how, let's say, I won't even say any names because I'm trying to be good. Agency A that people might find to be a problematic agency and perhaps should be defunded in some way because of the work that they've done that some might feel is targeted to certain communities, and maybe looking at Agency B that is doing really great work in areas around equity and improving things for Black folks in New York City, as an example. Are you looking across agencies too to see how funds could maybe be reappropriated to best serve the city more equitably, or is it just focused on like agency by agency spending? Is there any like cross agency work? Because to your point, and I get it, and I understand like OMB's mandate, and so not even thinking about how we can increase money, but how are we spending the $100 billion that we have right now across the city, not just within a particular agency, but across agencies, and if money could be reallocated from one agency to another agency, not just reallocation within the agency, to me that seems something to be analyzed as well. So I'm just wondering if that is a part of your thinking, not just within agencies, but have you also been thinking across agencies how spending could be more equitable?
Sure. So we've been thinking across agencies around how goals can be aligned, right? And I think goals then lead to how and where and you allocate resources, right? And that helps that decision-making process. But our focus has been on how we align goals. So while there are a collection of individual agency plans, there is a citywide plan. The purpose of the citywide plan certainly is to cast citywide goals, but also to connect the dots. So a lot of our work is connecting the dots between various city agencies to build alignment, right? And I think that again, creates whatever the priority is. Our job is certainly, we are not allocating the city budget, right? But I think that we're providing the information and setting the priorities necessary for us to think about resource allocation in the context of those shared goals.
Yeah, like in my head, and you can tell me if like this is how you feel the intent of this office, would be implemented, is that there would be, some type of documentation analysis that provides a clearer picture on how the city could be spending more equitably and serving certain communities that have been historically underserved. And then, OMB and whatever agency head would be using that information to craft budgets that reflect whatever, recommendations, reports that you put out.
Yeah, and so the plan, I think, provides us an opportunity to identify how resources are, right, or can be allocated across certain communities or certain issue areas, not necessarily how they're allocated across agencies, right, but really organize how it's allocated across the priorities, whether that be, geographic, population, issue area, et cetera.
Okay, so part of your plan is more so focused on the priorities and almost like means testing the budget to the priorities that you have identified through the plan.
Yeah, I mean, the plan really is like setting these goals, the strategies that are short and long term to achieve these goals, with an understanding that many of the goals are cross-functional, right? So, if you think of any challenge in the city, right, it's no one agency's job to solve, and so our expectation is the citywide goals are capturing those, and that's used to inform all of our decision-making.
Okay, given some of your answers, I guess you haven't really reviewed the executive budget this year, right? The goal is to really do that analysis next year.
Exactly, we'll have a plan at that point. Mm-hmm.
Okay, according to the Charter's 2024 Racial Equity Planning Schedule, MOERJ must publish its first racial equity progress report no later than 3 weeks after the mayor submits the citywide racial equity plan. Does MOERJ expect to be able to follow this schedule for the currently projected racial equity planning timeline? So in other words, can we expect this progress report by the end of the year?
So I think that may be, the progress report is due the year after.
Oh,
I think maybe that is the Commission on Racial Equity provides yeah, exactly. So the Commission on Racial Equity, which is an independent commission, and I know you'll hear from them later today, they provide an evaluation of our plan after it's prepared, and then we prepare a progress report in the next year, and we'll be on track to do that.
okay. Does MOERJ expect to revert to the originally envisioned schedule for racial equity plans after this year? So in other words, will the racial equity planning process for 2026 follow the timeline outlined in the charter?
Our goal is to get this back on to the original timeline after this initial report for all of the deliverables.
Thank you. Could you speak to how the racial equity planning process is going so far and how MOERJ has been engaging with or plans to engage city agencies and systems?
Sure, I will turn to our Deputy Commissioner Nagash to speak about that.
Yep, so as the commissioner mentioned, we've briefed our leadership here at City Hall. We've also briefed our agency commissioners, chiefs of staff, other leaders within the administration. We spent a considerable amount of time also preparing to kind of what we're calling like onboarding agencies into the process, training them and ensuring that they have the understanding, we have shared understanding of the language that we're using, the work that we're doing, and the goals that we're setting, and give them the tools, as I said, that they really need to complete their plan. We've also been meeting with agencies one-on-one to just brainstorm and be a thought partner in this work. As the commissioner mentioned, we've had a number of agencies that are just extremely excited to move this forward, have a lot of ideas. We have city staff who have been with the city for a long time and have also been doing equity work just in their, divisions or working to push it forward within their agency, so they're excited to build on that. So we're providing one-on-one support, technical assistance. We've recently hired a director of equity planning and technical assistance who's helping to lead that process as well. We're utilizing a collaborative process once draft plans are submitted to really review them, understand them, and see how we can partner to just finalize them and ensure that they're quality, they're transformative, and they meet the demands of the charter, what the charter is asking us to do, what New Yorkers have asked us to do.
Thank you. And you kind of somewhat answered the next question, which is how would you describe agencies' general level of preparation for engaging in this racial equity planning process? And it does seem, as you mentioned, that some agencies might already have an equity officer or someone that is serving in an equity-like role already doing this work. But I don't know if you have anything else to add in terms of the general sort of level of preparation that they have to engage in this process.
Yeah, I would add that, I think we recognize that every agency is in a different place. So what we're trying to do is, understand where they are first and foremost, meet them where they are, and then see, where we need to go to meet the goals of the plan and what the charter has asked us to do. So we have, general tools and resources that we're providing, but, when we're connecting and meeting with agencies, we're also asking them what they need from us. Maybe that's outside of that frame, what we've provided, so that we can ensure that they have what they need to move forward. But yeah, I just would, reiterate, we have agencies that are really excited to do this work.
Awesome. And, understanding that no agency is alike, are you able to provide like an estimation around how many agencies already have an equity officer or somebody maybe doing diversity? I know a lot of times these positions are sitting in HR offices, like EEO. I feel like a lot of EEO officers and agencies tend to be doing this work. So are you able to roughly say across agencies, how many agencies actually have someone doing this work?
Yeah,
it could be an estimation.
Yeah, I mean, I would, just to answer that, I would say that, what we've asked commissioners and agency heads, executive directors to really do is we don't want to rely on one single person to carry out this work across the agency. It's way too big and a very important process. And we, as the commissioner said, we want these to be quality plans. So what we've asked agencies to do is really form a racial equity planning team within their agency that cuts across different functions to really ensure that, plans speak to core business and we're not just relying on a single person, right, with an equity title or a particular division to really craft that plan. It has to cut across. Cut across functions if we want to ensure that it's transformative.
No, I think that's right. But are you able to share like agencies that already either have a person or an office?
As in like a chief equity, like an equity titled position?
Yeah, or
something.
someone that may not have like the title equity, but when you speak to them, like their portfolio includes some forms of like assessing equity, whether it's within the agency itself and or the work that they're doing, you know, for New Yorkers.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
We can follow up. I don't have a list like that with me today, but we can certainly follow up.
Okay, no problem.
And I would just add, I mean, obviously all officers have EEO officers, all agencies have EEO officers who may or may not be involved, or the person in the planning process. All agencies also have chief diversity officers. Usually these folks have responsibilities associated with MWB contracting, but sometimes they have responsibilities that are beyond that. But to your point, there are other types of equity roles in different agencies. Some may not be titled that way too. And this planning process is also helping us identify those folks.
Are you intentionally doing that, or is that happening by chance?
So to Deputy Commissioner Nagash's point, when we reached out to create planning teams, we've asked agencies to identify someone who reports to the agency head as part of the planning team. That could be a deputy commissioner, for instance. That could also be their equity person, whether it's an officer, et cetera. And so we've intentionally asked agencies to include those people in this process.
Yep. And I would just also add, we've also asked agencies to include staff that have the equity expertise background and already do that work.
And that their teams be diverse and reflect the city.
I love that. How does MOERJ plan to measure accountability to the city's racial equity plan going forward?
So every plan will have a set of strategies, as well as indicators. And so our role as we move into the implementation phase will be to work with agencies to not just track indicators, but also to understand how we're moving along the process, so that we could also mitigate any challenges that are happening. So the progress report will provide that public update. I shared earlier that the Commission on Racial Equity, and I know they've shared a set of community equity priorities. They also, have an opportunity to share potential indicators too, and so that can also be part of the plan. And that's something that we would make sure to track and report publicly as part of our process.
Thank you. Almost done. How is MOERJ working with the Commission on Racial Equity in relation to racial equity planning?
Sure. So CORE has also been a really great partner in this process. They've hit the ground running and have developed a set of draft community equity priorities. We brought CORE into the training sessions that we've had with agencies so that they can directly deliver those community equity priorities to agencies and explain them. And provide an opportunity for agencies to ask questions, to really understand them, unpack them, so that they can, consider that in their planning process. And so we regularly exchange updates, information with CORE, and we look forward to sharing a draft plan with the Commission in the fall.
Thank you. Just a few more questions. Measuring the true cost of living. Could you describe MOERJ's work to date to develop, implement, and report on the true cost of living metric that the 2022 charter amendments require?
Sure. So as I mentioned in my testimony, we've certainly have started some initial research and assessment of various tools and measures across the country, as well as meeting with other folks who've done this research. We've also done some internal assessment. Obviously, the city produces a poverty report, which is different than what this is, right? But also offers us some ideas on how we develop methodology, potential data sources, and how we create something that's sustainable over time. Our work right now, after we've done some of that initial research, is moving forward with an initial methodology from the city. We're also working to bring on some third-party support to increase our capacity as we go through that planning process.
Thank you. There are other questions, but I think you're still formulating it. But, just, I guess, understanding like what the methodology will be. How do you plan to evaluate or determine the true measure to measure the true cost of living? You have that information now, or you're working to get to that place?
We're working to get to that place. I can just share, this is of great importance to us and to our city. True cost of living measure, as I shared in my testimony, really offers an opportunity for us to understand the magnitude of people across our city who are certainly, working to get by. Can certainly be a way in which we advocate for what we need as a city on behalf of working people. And so we're looking to, certainly measure basic needs, also make sure that we're measuring ways in which people can withstand emergencies, but also making sure that we're creating a measure that accounts for the economic stability that people need to really plan for their future. And so this is uncharted territory for sure. And so we want to make sure we do this in a way that's really thoughtful. And so again, we look forward to sharing that methodology and briefing the council.
Thank you. Now on the Task Force on Racial Inclusion and Equity, can you tell us about the current activities of the task force and its plans and priorities for the coming year, and how the task force's work has shifted, if at all, since MOERJ was established?
Sure, I'll turn to Deputy Commissioner Nagash.
Yeah, so the Task Force on Racial Inclusion and Equity's work continues. Our focus has been primarily, and the Commissioner referenced this in her testimony, on responding to longstanding disparities in the Bronx. So that's been a big focus of our work and will continue to be in this fiscal year. We've worked with a subcommittee within the Task Force on Racial Inclusion and Equity to look at, to form kind of a vision, some overarching areas of issue areas and goals, and start to really think about what strong existing strategies should we be potentially expanding within the borough, what are both from within the city but also within community, and then what new strategies should we be thinking about moving forward. So we've worked with our task force to do that. We've held a number of engagement sessions also within the Bronx to really connect directly with community on the direction of the plan and ensure that it's informed by community, and we'll continue to do that in this fiscal year.
Thank you very much for your testimony and answering my questions. I really appreciate the work that you're doing. I know it's very hard work and you have a lot to handle within the next year, so good luck to you. I'm here to be supportive, and yeah, just thank you so much for this very important work. I think more people should know about the work. I think you should be completely empowered, and yeah, just thank you so much for being here.
Thank you,
especially you, Commissioner.
You.
I know you're like still not here, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're gonna switch to the core panel now. Thank you for your patience. Turn it over to Jessica to swear you in.
Good morning still, I think, yes. Thank you for being with us today. I will swear in our new panel now, which is the Commission on Racial Equity. We have the Chair and Executive Director with us, Linda Tigani. If you could please raise your right hand. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this committee, and to respond honestly to council member questions? Very good. Thank you so much. Please begin whenever you're ready.
Okay. Good morning, Chair, Dr. Natasha Williams, and members of the Civil and Human Rights Committee. My name is Linda Tajani, and I have the honor of serving as the inaugural Chair and Executive Director of the New York City Commission on Racial Equity, referred to throughout today's testimony as CORE. I lead CORE in partnership with 13 commissioners and look forward to welcoming one more commissioner to be appointed by Mayor Adams. Today's testimony represents a significant step toward further establishing the commission within city government. CORE's focus is to ensure that members of the public who have inequitable power, who historically have been oppressed and are denied service, are included in the groups that the government feels accountable to. Accountability is critical to democracy and the building of public trust in government. CORE was created to offer a public channel to bring community and government together to transparently discuss how the legacy of slavery and the structural denial of civil and human rights show up in the practice of a multiracial democracy. We are one of a kind. There is no comparable independent accountability body on a local, state, or federal level whose explicit mission is to channel community accountability, to identify and uproot racism in the fabric of our city, and to reimagine a city and a set of social systems centering racial equity and social justice. CORE is a partner to the public and our city agencies in the efforts to advance racial equity in New York City's public engagement, legislative, and budgeting process. Although this testimony is presented in the final days of fiscal year 2025 budgeting process, the budget process is not over. And I hope that the discussion today will encourage members of City Council ahead of any final decisions to reflect on how our city's fiscal year 2025 budget addresses racism, the legacy of historically racist policies, and how our budget can move oppressed communities past mere survival and instead ensure that they receive all of the services they need to live healthy, happy, and safe lives to a place of thriving. Since May, the CORE team has reached over 140 organizations, and their members have consistently expressed excitement for our work. Throughout my conversations with the public, I continue to hear, "I remember this, I voted for it." Many expressed their excitement in seeing the measure they enthusiastically voted for come democratically to life. At the same time, community organizations and advocacy groups have shared concerns about CORE's capacity to fulfill its mandate to increase accountability for racial equity in government operations. In February 2024, Robin Hood released a new poverty tracker report that shows poverty in New York City rose from 1.5 million to 2 million between 2021 and 2022. Latino New Yorkers were twice as likely to live in poverty compared to white New Yorkers. Poverty rates were similarly elevated among Asian and Black New Yorkers, 24% and 23% respectively. Black New Yorkers had the lowest life expectancy among racial and ethnic groups at 76.1 years, while white New Yorkers had the highest at 81.8 years. None of this should be surprising. Racial disparities in access to government services are the direct product of policy, procedures, and decision-making processes. Racism in our operations is not accidental, but rather the result of deliberate decisions, whether they are dictated through the administrative code, agency handbook, funding formulas, or legislation. New York City is operating agencies and programs that were created during or in response to Jim Crow, widespread upset over forced desegregation, and the current attack and rollback of civil and human rights protections. In recognition of these inequities, the New York City Charter outlines 5 pathways for CORE. First, our commission must identify and propose community equity priorities and outcome indicators relevant to the well-being of community members for possible inclusion in the upcoming citywide and agency racial equity plans in accordance with the equity planning schedule. Second, following the releases of the administration's preliminary citywide racial equity plan and of the citywide racial equity plan, the commission shall make a public statement assessing the extent to which the plan is responsive to community equity priorities and make recommendations on strategy, indicators, and goals set forth in the plan. Third, CORE will track and publicly report on the agency and citywide compliance with the racial equity planning process. Fourth, we will receive complaints about agency conduct that may have the effect of exacerbating racial equity disparities, and we will make recommendations to agencies to address such complaints where appropriate. Lastly, CORE is mandated to respond to the requests of the Speaker of the Council and its committees regarding racial equity concerns. Now I would like to turn to the development of CORE and provide updates on our work. In fiscal year 2024, the Commission started with a total budget of $1.3 million, which is separated into personnel services at $905,000 and operating costs at $395,000. Our FY24 budget accounted for 7 staff, including myself, and a small amount of operational funds to conduct community outreach. We accepted a proposed cut under the plan to eliminate the gap, also known as the PEG, in fiscal year 2024 for $451,000, which was covered by underspending and personnel costs due to delay in hiring. The accepted cut is expected to cover the full 5-year target, providing there are no subsequent PEGs. CORE launched on October 11, 2023, 3 months after the identified start date in the New York City Charter, and has since accomplished an extraordinary amount, in my view, in view of the scarcity of resources. As the only staff member from October 2023 to March 2024, I focused on fostering CORE's relationship with the public and government agencies. At this point, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Mayor's Office of Equity and Racial Justice, who worked to ensure that CORE was in the fiscal 2024 budget, was afforded staff lines, had desk space, and provided support announcing the city's commission, provided administrative support, and collaborating with appointing bodies to identify commissioners. Within my first 3 months, I held over a dozen introductory sessions with organizations that partnered with the Racial Justice Commission. I launched the CORE website with the support of OTI and MOERJ. I reviewed more than 600 applications to fill 6 positions on the inaugural team. Starting mid-March 2024, I began onboarding the first commission staff after 6 months of operating as a team of 1. CORE is closing out fiscal year 2024 fully staffed. On May 13th, CORE released 16 draft community equity priorities, both to the public at large and to city agencies for their review, consideration, and feedback. Prior to public release, CORE held 7 virtual sessions and received feedback from 21 community-based organizations participating in the Task Force on Racial Equity and Inclusion Neighborhood Network Initiative, and from organizations that conduct participatory budgeting to shape the draft priorities. Additionally, CORE commissioners shaped the language and identified inequities that we must address. The draft community equity priorities and public response form can be found on our website at nyc.gov/core. I have included the priorities in today's testimony to be submitted to public record. We have presented at each of the citywide racial equity planning in-person and virtual trainings. We conducted training for 24 community organization staff to further these efforts within their respective networks and are continuing to receive requests from other partners. We presented to over 160 faith leaders coordinated by the Mayor's Office of Faith-Based Partnerships and at various Manhattan Community Board meetings. We're currently continuing to expand our reach to community education councils, community boards, social justice networks, advocacy groups, faith-based organizations, and other community-based organizations to ensure that we are meeting New Yorkers wherever they are and through service providers they trust. Additionally, I've appreciated the partnership with Council thus far. While launching the draft community equity priorities, I began working with your team, Councilmember Hudson, Councilmember Nurse, and Councilmember Lewis to operationalize how the city can move forward the work of undoing racism through two critical pieces of legislation on reparations, reconciliation, truth, and healing, Intros 242 and 279. CORE remains a partner to all members and staff of City Council and looks forward to exploring how legislation can be strengthened to advance racial equity and social justice, regardless of whether CORE is named. To build on this foundation and fulfill its promise to the electorate, it will be imperative for CORE to receive adequate funding. Now I would like to turn to fiscal year 2025. In fiscal year 2025, I will request additional money to close the CORE funding gap and complete the launch of our charter mandates. In fall 2024, we expect the administration's preliminary racial equity and citywide racial equity plans to be released. Following the release, CORE will have 30 days to review and provide public comment. CORE commissioners are expected to finalize community equity priorities. Concurrently, CORE staff will launch guidance for New Yorkers on how to file a complaint with CORE. We will expand to a team of 12 members, hiring 5 people in FY25 to support each area of our work. To support the expanded integration and use of data, CORE will ask for a data system lead to manage the collection, tracking, maintenance, compliance, and development of our use of data. CORE will need to expand our team beyond the allocated 5 lines. To fulfill our mandate, we need to grow our research and policy team along with our general counsel and legislative team to support the second charter mandate. The assessment of the administration's preliminary racial equity and citywide racial equity plan, Charter Mandate 3, which is the subsequent tracking of the final plan, and Charter Mandate 4 to address complaints about agency conduct that may have the effect of exacerbating racial equity disparities and make recommendations to agencies to address such complaints where appropriate. New staff will be requested to carry out Charter Mandates 2, 3, and 4, and to partner with Council to leverage racial equity impact assessment tool to sufficiently respond to requests from the Speaker of the Council and Council Committee on matters related to racial equity, Charter Mandate number 5. In fiscal year 2025, CORE will launch robust community organizing and engagement practices to ensure that community voices are at the table. We will need additional funds to increase payments to community groups for the time and resources they're contributing to CORE's work. We will also need to pay commissioners per diem for their time and reimbursements for their expenses related to work conducted for the commission. Projected funding for fiscal year 2025 does not include a budget to pay commissioners as mandated by law. Our fiscal year 2025 budget will increase to $1,329,093, and in fiscal year 2026, we are expected to be baselined at $1,335,741. Increases in fiscal year 2025 and 2026 are a result of collective bargaining and managerial adjustments. It does not account for the development of core staff, workflows, or for commissioner costs, per diem, and reimbursements. In closing, I want to urge the City Council to fulfill its mandate to apply a racial equity lens to New York City government operations and reflect on the following questions in the final negotiations over the city's budget items. How does this investment counteract racism and the history of racism, if at all? Will this policy or investment reduce, perpetuate, or exacerbate racial inequity in service delivery? Will it reverse the breakup of families and communities or reduce the over-marginalization and criminalization of New Yorkers of color? Is the policy or investment based on needs and goals expressed by impacted communities? And finally, does the investment reflect the foundational principles expressed in the preamble of the Charter of the City of New York? Thank you.
Thank you. In my head, I was like, listen, Linda, coming here asking us the real questions. And my very quick macro answer to that is bureaucracy is racist. I really want to do a report on this because I think the way that we do our budget process is bureaucratic in nature and doesn't really allow for us to ascertain the questions you asked in the negotiation process. And so it's very frustrating for someone like me who really wants to see some change and, you know, see funding moved around to reflect all that you mentioned. But the process in itself doesn't always allow for us to properly be able to assess and negotiate the budget based off of these questions. So I think we need to really look at the process in which we do budgets in New York City, the process in which we pass legislation. It's all like a system that we are just all like continuing to perpetuate with not really taking a step back to change the system itself that we are currently operating in. So thank you for your testimony and your questions. So I will also start with questions around appointments and staffing and timeline. So the charter states that the first term for each member shall commence on August 1st, 2023. Currently, there still remains one vacancy on the commission. Although you've been very busy with lots of things, I wanted to say that too. You have worked very hard since you've been hired under very racist bureaucracy. So additionally, 2 appointees were only just announced on June 24th, 2024, while the remaining appointees were announced on May 13th, 2024. What are the reasons for the nearly year-long delay in commissioner appointments?
Thank you for the question. Appointments are made by the appointing bodies. In this case, the 2 appointments that you are referring to are made by the mayor's office, handled by the mayor's office of appointments, so I'd have to defer to them to better understand their timeline.
Okay. Are you able to share any information or timeline for when CORE's appointment of commissioners?
At this time, we are only waiting for one more commissioner. We are hoping to be able to complete that process before the community equity priorities are finalized, which we expect to be finalized in the fall. However, CORE is not a part of the appointment process, so that timeline does sit with the mayor's office of appointments and mayor's team. I'd recommend reaching out to them.
Okay, but is it true that you also do have the power to make appointments on your own?
Yes, so CORE is very unique in that we can use our authority to take a seat that has not been filled after 90 days. After doing some research and talking with folks that created the commission, my understanding is that that authority was really intended if an appointment was not intended for the inaugural seats, and if someone was not appointed sort of in the second round of commissioners. I did share with our commissioners that we do have that authority. At this point in time, we have elected not to use it, and we may change the decision in the future. However, we are currently still waiting for the mayor's team to appoint.
Will the appointed commissioners able to begin their work prior to these public announcements? Oh, I wasn't on this whole time? Oh gosh, sorry. Yikes, the public missed so many of the important things I said. Were these newly appointed commissioners able to begin work prior to these public announcements?
Yes, they were. So in the first set, we received the controller's appointment first, then the public advocate's appointment, and they started once I received their information. I reached out to them, and then we began to receive speaker and mayoral appointments. We waited until May 13th to announce everyone that we had, because they were trickling in over time. And then called it on May 13th because we wanted to release the draft community equity priorities, and we wanted the public to know who is in the room to help shape those priorities, even though that they were a draft. I believe of the last two commissioners appointed, Amilcar and Wendy, Amilcar was also able to start prior to her formal announcement. Everyone started after their appointment letters were issued. But there certainly was a little bit of time between when we publicly announced them and when they joined.
Thank you. How many times has the commission been able to meet so far?
So we meet every month, at least once a month. So it's the first Friday of every month. And we have met, we've met 6 times.
Thank you. So back to the commissioner selection process. Can you tell us about the selection or vetting process? I know you don't play a core role, but if you could share, if any at all, the selection or vetting process and your role in that process as chair.
I do not have a role in the selection or vetting process.
Okay. Do you know, if any, what criteria and considerations were taken into account when selecting and vetting commissioners?
So the charter mandate outlines key requirements, not requirements, but considerations for the appointing bodies. And so that includes never having served on a board before, representing communities that are traditionally underrepresented, and also having a background either in advocacy, racial equity, and public service.
Do you feel like the current appointments reflect that?
I do. I'm very honored to work with the 13 commissioners that have been appointed. They're a diverse group. They represent everything from labor to environmental justice to civil rights to health equity. I think this is a great team to work with. I'm really excited.
Can you describe a little bit more about the appointed commissioner's qualifications with respect to like some of the things you just mentioned, civil rights, community leadership?
Sure. So we have Dr. Torian Easterling, who was the Health Department's inaugural Chief Equity Officer, and he led the Race to Justice team and health equity, as well as the COVID vaccine equity campaign at the Health Department. So his expertise is both content-based, but also understands the tools that we're going to be using to assess both the plan as well as requests that we get from the Speaker's Office or council committees. Reverend Kirsten John Foy also has extensive experience advocating on behalf of communities, also from a faith-based perspective, advocating with faith-based communities to advance civil rights not only in New York City but across the nation. We also have Cristobal Gutierrez, who is a speaker appointee that comes with extensive experience in employment law and works with Make the Road New York. He's a lead attorney there. And I would say just one other example from the mayor's team, we have Andrew K. Gabriel, or Drew Gabriel as he goes by, and he has extensive experience working with young people and really being able to advocate on the needs for individuals under the age of 25. He is also the representative of voices he's the representative of young people or people under the age of 25.
I'm going to channel Chair Stevens, who always says this, which is, we always talk about young people, but they're not in the room. Mm-hmm. And I love Drew. I know him, but he's not under 25. So I think it's weird when we say someone represents the voice instead of just getting the voice itself. in the room. So nothing against Drew. He's great. Hi, Drew, if you're listening. You deserve to be there, but I think someone probably under 25 should probably also be in that space because he's not under 25. But it's like he's I don't know. I just channeling Chair Stevens, who is the chair of our youth committee. She always says that, and this is another case where age demographics are not really seen on the commission. It's kind of strange. Okay, so how many potential candidates were vetted for the commissioner role? Are you able to share that? Do you know how many have been vetted for the commissioner role?
I don't, because I'm not a part of that process.
Several commissioners also have current roles in city government. Does CORE foresee any possible conflicts of interest between CORE's watchdog responsibilities and the commissioners who are actively serving in their government roles?
So at this current moment, we are developing our bylaws, which will include a process for recusal for any commissioner for any subject, and it will apply to any commissioner that is a city staff member, regardless of who's appointed them or what their city role is.
Right. And, you know, when Commissioner Sherman was speaking and talking about her work versus CORE, I really feel like CORE is supposed to be like the people-driven arm. So I do also find it a bit strange that we have government employees who are a part of this commission in this sort of like volunteer capacity. I'm not really sure how government actors can speak to community needs as they are also acting on behalf of, you know, their 9-to-5 day-to-day jobs. Like, I don't really understand that.
If it's okay, I'd like to offer a point of clarification. Commissioners are, of course, appointed by particular appointing bodies, but this is not specifically a reflection of their day job. When they come to participate in commission activity, whether it is doing outreach with our staff at a block party or at a public event, or if it's to join into a community conversation, they're there representing community, not their appointing body, not their 9-to-5 job. And so in that respect, also commissioners are paid per diem, and they are offered reimbursements for any expenses related to the commission. The only people who are not paid per diem are commissioners that are currently city staff. All other commissioners are afforded that financial reimbursement for their time.
Okay, I think similar to my comments on Drew is the same here, where you have an opportunity to have individuals who are directly impacted and maybe, I don't know, arguably closer to the many issues that your office is seeking to address. And so, I mean, I think it's a missed opportunity, and we should have probably really been more thoughtful around how the commission reflects the representation of the city and the intent of CORE. How many staff members are currently employed within CORE?
We have filled all of our FY24 lines, so we have 7 staff members.
Are there any open vacancies? No. How are staffing levels projected in the next fiscal year? Because I know you mentioned that you would want to potentially increase your staff lines.
Correct. So we have 5 additional lines, rather we have 5 lines that are projected for FY25. 4 of those jobs are currently posted. And just to note to your earlier point around youth voice, we absolutely want them in the room, and they are self-determined young people themselves. And so they need to be able to speak their truth. We have met with young people already to provide feedback on the draft community equity priorities. This process is open to anyone over the age of 11 and older, which aligns with our Civic Engagement Commission participatory budgeting process. And one of our lines for FY25 is specifically focusing on youth voice. So we will be adding a staff member to our Director of Organizing and Engagement team that will specifically work on organizing young people for the commission.
Okay, I mean, in your testimony, you talk about how for now you seem to be okay, but do you want to ramp up in subsequent years? So do you feel or do you project that you'll be adequately staffed to fully carry out your mandate?
At this current moment, without additional staff, I don't believe that we will. We do need additional lines to be able to assess the preliminary plan and the final plan, but also to be able to assess the complaints that we expect to come in from community. Already during introductory sessions, we hear people tell us, like, can you accept this type of a complaint? Is this an issue that you could work on? And so I am expecting that we're going to receive complaints in a higher volume. And at the current moment, our staff really can only work on what they have on their plate. Any complaint that comes in would be a stretch if we're not able to add capacity.
Okay, so as you ramp up your full capacity, how will work be prioritized with the lower staffing levels?
I'm sorry, how will what?
So how will work be prioritized with the lower staffing levels? Like, let's say you are not able to ramp up, but your work is going to increase over time. So how will you prioritize your work in lieu of not potentially having enough staffers to complete the work?
That's a great question. I suspect at this current moment, both with our 7 staff right now and our 5 staff that will be coming in, we will have at least one person assigned to each charter mandate. We do want to expand the support in core to include college and high school internships, to be able to have year-round interns as well as to have SYEP interns. We're actually going to be bringing on SYEP interns this summer so that we can support organizing and engagement work. And I am exploring other opportunities to bring in researchers and different collaboratives to, one, make sure that community voice is at the table, but also to help with the types of reporting that we're expecting will happen in the fall and then in subsequent years.
Thank you. So turning my questions over to budget, and we'll read this again. The charter states that the budget appropriations for CORE's expenses during each fiscal year shall be not less than an amount sufficient to fund personnel services for full-time and part-time personnel necessary to implement the charter mandated requirements of the commission. You did, and I appreciate you talking about your budget, and the FY24 budget was $905,000. Was CORE able to use all of its resources allocated in the budget for personnel expenses in FY24?
We had underspending in FY24 because of the delay of hiring. So we did not get to use all $905,000. We were cut $451,000. We accepted the PEG that came from OMB because we had savings from not having been able to hire, or rather, our first staff member didn't start until March. We are expected to spend down all of FY25 personnel costs pretty early in the year because we do have job postings up right now. So we're expecting to hire those 5 additional lines closer to the start of the fiscal year than we were able to in FY24.
Okay, turning to the operational components of the budget, FY24 adopted budget allocated $395,000 to OTPS costs, which is meant to cover necessary supplies, equipment, and utilities, etc. Was CORE able to utilize the full budgeted amount?
We were only able to utilize a partial amount. That particular budget is used for community organizing and engagement activities. We started our work paying the public, so paying organizations to participate in community conversations, either host them or invite CORE after the draft community equity priorities were released, which means we've only had from May 13th up until this day to plan with organizations. While they're absolutely excited, they've joined introductory sessions, they've joined facilitation sessions, we are now in actual sort of like date mode, And the dates that we're getting from groups is really all set for July. And groups are setting their schedule. They're preparing for their own end-of-year activities. And so because of that, we had underspending in our OTPS, which we expect to spend down in the first quarter of FY24 because of the number of engagements that we already have on the calendar.
Okay, and OMB, you didn't receive a PEG for OTPS. Like, are you going to be able to have that same line item going into the next fiscal year, or was your budget decreased in
We
OTPS?
will have this same line item going into the next fiscal year. And we have already flagged that we anticipate needing additional funds. When we began talking to community organizations this year about funding community conversations, they said that we need to increase the amount. That the number that we were offering, so it's $1,750 to host a conversation, which means we would train one of your community members to lead a conversation on the priorities. One of our team members would be in the room, and one of our commissioners would be in the room, because we do want commissioners to be in the room when people are voicing what their concerns are and any reflections they have to the equity priorities. We then offered $1,000 for any organization that can create the conversation, and then one of our team members would host it, which means they're doing all of the outreach, they're getting the food, they're making sure that people are in the room. Each conversation should have 15 to 20 people. And then the one requirement across both of those options is that community members must be paid for their time, no less than $15, either in a gift card in whatever process the organization deems best. I've received several calls saying that both of those amounts are low because of the amount of time it takes to ensure that you have 15 to 20 people in the room. And so they rightfully so are asking for additional funds to host a community conversation, and we would like to be able to meet that request because they are doing the hard work of getting people in the room and getting folks to meet with us and commissioners.
Yes, I concur with that. I sent a mailer, I did emails, we had got another organization to do canvassing of like hundreds of doors for a town hall I hosted a few weeks ago, and there was only like 20 plus people that showed up when thousands of doors got like snail mail, they got canvassed, and I did a robocall, and I did emails. So yes, it is a challenge to really bring people out. So I would concur with that for sure. Was CORE or does CORE have adequate office space for its current staffing levels and projected staffing levels?
So currently CORE sits with MOERJ. So we have 7 seats that were allocated to us in FY24, and we have filled those seats. We do not have seats for FY25. We are talking with DCAS and with OMB. I would say as often, probably as once a week, our director of operations and administration is on the phone, really trying to find space for FY25 so that we can bring people on and they have a place to sit. So we're hoping to be able to have a space identified within the next month or two, but again, that's another area that's out of my hands.
Government is slow, so if you are not able to have new space within 2 months and you bring people on, do you intend to bring new people on within 2 months, or is it a further projection when you expect people to come on board, new people?
That's a great question. I would say the work cannot wait. We are already stretched with the amount of requests that we're getting for community conversations, and we only have 2 staff members in that particular area of work. Thankfully, we do have a work from home policy that aligns with the city's policy. So our team is coming up with creative ways to ensure that everyone can come into the office and meet at least 3 days, meet the requirement of at least 3 days in the office. But again, we're continuing to work with DCAS and OMB to get into another space or find additional desks in the meantime, but we do need our own office.
So essentially, you're playing musical chairs throughout the week.
I'm sorry, say that
So
again?
essentially, you would be playing musical chairs throughout the week. It would be
I hope
the shared.
I hope not.
Okay.
I hope not. And I will say DCAS is working to identify space, so I feel confident that we'll be able to move into a space, but I personally do not want to delay the work of CORE and what community is asking for. I would say right now it's a hard decision.
Okay, so in lieu of adequate space, essentially you are being creative and innovative around how people are able to come in the office and have a place to sit throughout the week. Has CORE ever reached out to OMB to discuss budget needs, and if so, what was the response? So I know you mentioned that you have been having conversations in your testimony. I don't know if you have anything else to share, and if you intend to have further conversations with OMB for future budget cycles.
Yeah, so we talk to OMB regularly. We keep them apprised of all of our hiring, when candidates accept, when we expect them to come through the system. We've talked to them about our community organizing and engagement plans. We've also talked through what the numbers are with respect to reimbursements for commissioners, as well as their per diem rate. We plan to keep those conversations going and, again, periodically update them on what's going on. They know right now all of our FY25 plans, and they are aware that we are both in need of space, but that we are also going to need to ensure that we meet the legal mandate and pay our commissioners for their time.
Thank you. CORE did not participate in the council's preliminary or executive budget hearing this year. How did CORE determine its budget needs for the coming year?
So our determination for our budget needs is actually based on a few different pieces. The first is being able to understand what's the volume and interest in CORE from the public so that we have a sense of how many conversations, how many organizations we need to be working with, and how many of those are hard to reach, how many of those may have a fiscal sponsor versus be a 501c3. We actually used this first round of we're using this first round of community conversations to better understand what is the payment that is needed to community organizations to get the amount right so that they can fully engage. We also have been working to better understand each of our charter mandates and approximate how much staff as well as consultants that may be needed. Our communications team has identified a list of both licenses as well as programs, whether they be advertising programs or else, to properly communicate with the public, because we haven't done that yet. We have to purchase some licenses and really raise our social media profile specifically so that we can engage with young folks. And we have also began to draft our bylaws, which I think is extremely important for understanding the ways in which commissioners are going to show up for CORE. We expect those bylaws, and really the first step is the formal adoption process for community equity priorities to come this fall. And so the calculations that were created were really based on staff time, as well as better understanding, what are the complaints informally, just sort of questions about our work, and that particular mandate that we're getting to really estimate what we think we're going to get once we go live and we have formal guidance on our website.
Thank you. The fiscal 2025 executive budget, and you also have testified a headcount increase of 5 in the coming fiscal year compared to last year. Can you tell us about the new roles that CORE is planning to add in the coming year?
So the 5 lines that we currently have right now, 4 of which are posted, and we're waiting actually just to clarify what the title is going to be for the civil service title for the last one. So we will have a senior legislative aide that will specifically work on Charter Mandate number 5. We are adding a community organizing and engagement associate that's specifically going to focus on youth voice and organizing young people under the age of 25. We are going to have a operations and administration associate. That person will play the role of commissioner manager, so helping me work with all 13 and what we hope will be all 14 commissioners, making sure that all their onboarding is set, they've got everything that they need for meetings, and they feel ready and prepared to come to a conversation at a commission meeting, either to make decisions or provide guidance. We are adding a communications associate who's going to help increase what right now is organic growth across all social media platforms, but also allow us to get creative and really work with community to better understand and promote how they see racial equity in government and what it is that they want to see how racial equity will grow in government. We are also adding an associate for our research and policy team, and that person's going to work with our current director to ensure that we are doing the work around both the preliminary and the final plan for the assessment, but also that we're developing community equity profiles that will do a analysis of the equity priorities that we have and be able to provide long-term support to tracking change relating to the equity priorities that the City of New York has identified through CORE.
Okay, as you were speaking, I was thinking you should consult my colleague, Councilmember Chiose, because I will say he has done a really good job of getting messages across platforms in ways in which resonate with that demographic. And I also noticed with his page and other pages, I was at a conference and I met a young woman who is essentially tagged herself as a political influencer. And so she has tons of followers and like specifically focuses on getting, in this case, voting information out to younger demographics. And so I appreciate your foresight there, because there is almost an industry for that on social media, in very unique targeted ways to get sound bites, information, factual information out to literally under age 25. There was a whole panel on that of under age 25. In this case, thankfully, they were in the room, experts talking about their work. So that's awesome that you're doing that, and encourage you to tap into like this whole little world of influencers and individuals who are focused on this specifically. So the next questions I have are about your resources. So FY 2025 executive OTPS budget reflects $85,000 decrease compared to the FY 2024 adopted budget. Do you believe this decrease accurately reflects CORE's projected needs for FY 25? I think you've talked extensively about what you feel are your projected needs, so I'm gonna guess that it isn't, but would love to hear from you. And can you tell us, why or why not?
So my understanding is that the decrease of $85K is already accounted for, essentially, both in the OTPS budget, but also in the overall budget for CORE for FY25. And my understanding is that you would actually see that in the out years as well, even though it has been accounted for in the overall numbers. Again, I do expect that I am going to be going to OMB and saying this is essentially how much money we've spent thus far and what our engagement plans are. And it is why I consistently update OMB on how we're doing with community engagement and also how we're doing with requests from organizations. So I'm not anticipating that that particular decrease will cause a concern, but I'm anticipating that we will need additional monies regardless.
Thank you. Did CORE request any additional or new resources for FY25? And I think that was no, right? You think you're fine? I think it's more so FY26 is where you'll be.
We do plan to request additional resources for FY25. We'll be submitting, we're going to be submitting new needs in September, when my understanding is we as a city accept new needs. So we would want to see that money come in to the FY25 budget, and we will be putting in new needs for FY26.
Okay. To the mandate and fulfilling the mandate, the racial equity plans. What has been CORE's role so far in the citywide racial equity planning process?
So our first role and responsibility is to issue community equity priorities. Because of the abridged timeline, we issued draft community equity priorities so that the community could respond and reflect, but also tell us if there was something that was missing. Those priorities were developed after having reviewed footage of public feedback that was given to government in different scenarios, whether it be the town halls that happen from time to time, or previous engagement sessions or forums that were live streamed. We released the draft community equity priorities the day that the racial equity planning kickoff occurred, and so we've been able to present at every training that MOERJ has held, whether it be in person or virtual. We've given agencies the opportunity to also give us feedback, and we've been able to provide examples of how do you input, or rather how do you allow the draft community equity priorities to influence your decisions on the work that you're putting forward in the plan. We've also offered the key recommendation to every agency: please consider allowing one community equity priority from each value set. So the community equity priorities align with the fundamental values, and we understand that agencies may not be able to take up all 16 at the same time, but they certainly can take up an equity priority in the first value set, which is that our government justly values all talents and contributions. The second one, our government ensures the condition of thriving, and then our government vigilantly embraces remedy and reconstruction. We're offering that they identify at least one equity priority within those sets and include it in their plan.
Okay, part of CORE's mandate is to track and publicly report on agency and citywide compliance with the racial equity planning process. In what ways has CORE been able to monitor the racial equity planning process thus far?
So Commissioner Sherman and I meet, I would say, every 2 to 3 weeks. We also both agreed on the timeline that was released to the public, so it did account for both my work as well as the racial equity planning work, so we can ensure to stay as close to both the language of the law but also the spirit of the laws, allowing community equity priorities to influence the plan. And we continue to keep each other updated. One of the practices that we're going to be implementing in the next 2 months is being able to provide updates to MOERJ as well as the city agencies producing a plan, to give them insight on what is community telling us so far. So as we're actively collecting feedback from the government, from the public, we are also going to be providing periodic updates. So we're really taking them along with us in this process so that our final decision is not a surprise.
Okay, can you please describe any opportunities CORE has had to provide feedback on the current budget process and proposed budget priorities, including with respect to the draft community equity priorities?
At this point in time, CORE was not a part of the FY25 budgeting process. We haven't been able to provide feedback. However, we are looking to do that for future budget seasons. This is actually why I raised these particular questions, but I would also say that this is another opportunity to uplift Charter Mandate number 5, which is that council does have the power to call us in and use us to really raise these questions and bring us in when you're talking about particular investments or proposals, and also bring in the voices that CORE is bringing to the table. And I would argue that that's really the most important piece. One of the questions that we uplift is, is the policy or investment based on the needs and goals expressed by impacted communities? And so this is really about how do we bring people into the budgeting process, and how would that change our investments? And so I look forward to working with all of council to really bring this particular charter mandate to light and to fruition.
I appreciate that. So a few questions on community engagement and interagency coordination, and then you're done. Can you tell us about the community engagement efforts that CORE is currently undertaking?
Sure. So we have a few steps different offerings for a community. So the first is we have a public response form. You can go to our website at nyc.gov/core. I admit, I just type in core. I don't know the full URL. So you can go to our website, you can download the response form. We currently have the response form in English, but we are going to be uploading the response form in 11 other languages so that folks from different languages are also able to participate. You can join an introductory session, and you can do that by emailing askcore@core.nyc.gov. And you can just get an intro session on what is CORE, who are we, and what are we doing, and then be invited to host a community conversation. And then you let us know, do you want to host it and have one of your team members trained to lead the conversation, or would you like a member of CORE to lead it? We've also done tabling at various events. Sometimes it's a block party, sometimes it's a health wellness event. We attended a Queens Youth Summit. And I'm saying we, but I do want to uplift that that's really the Director of Community Organizing and Engagement who started, and on their first day was joining our introductory sessions, and then took them over by the end of the week, which has been a huge blessing that they've been able to lead that work. And I would say the last piece is we did issue a call for public testimony, and we're going to also update that particular page just so that we can shine some light. We're going to be reaching out to advocacy organizations across New York City to offer written testimony to CORE on a reflection on the draft equity priorities. We are hoping to receive all feedback by August 16th so that we can properly prepare memos and briefing packets for commissioners as they get ready to finalize the community equity priorities. I would also say we're open to talking to any organization that you would advise that we speak with. I've spoken to some council members who would like to share lists of organizations that they work with, and I would invite that for you and your team as well as for all of council. If there is someone, whether it's a group or an individual that you want us to talk to, certainly please either send them our way, ask for them to email askcore@core.nyc.gov, or they can reach us through social media. All of our social media handles are at Racial Equity NYC, and we have, I really can't say this enough, we have an amazing team, and our Director of Communications is also amazing and is very much on social media all the time and being able to connect us with different groups as well as different opportunities to table at. So we're open to all.
Thank you, and you definitely, well, one, I want to say I always appreciate your proactive nature, even in your testimony attaching the draft community equity priorities. And, we had a series of questions around your process thus far, but we have, the proof is here in terms of your process in determining the community equity priorities. So what kind of engagement have you seen from communities you work with, and from the general public with respect to CORE's work, including what you have shared with us today, the draft community equity priorities?
So I'll say first, it's pretty exciting to be a walking ballot measure come to real life. And so people are really excited to talk to CORE. And I hear often, oh, I remember voting for this. And I would say for some of the younger folk that I talk to, this is actually the first thing that they feel like they voted for and they saw come to life, which is, I think, pretty substantial note for just their civic engagement as well. The second thing I'll say, and it is both, I think, a blessing and maybe a little bit of a challenge, folks read our community equity priorities and they say, this is great. This is exactly what we would say. And so then they don't fill out the response form because they think, oh, you guys got it. And so we're doing our work to remind people, even if you agree, we do want to make sure that we are properly collecting responses from the public. And so we either have it in an email. What we have in email is, I saw your community priorities and they really align with our work. We want to set up a call to meet with you. We've also heard, thank you so much for including this community equity priority, and we've heard that around priority number 16, which is to reduce the jail population, as well as individuals of all ages that are in jail or court monitoring. And we've also heard this from CUNY students across the city. Thank you so much for uplifting CUNY and really speaking to the tuition costs are a barrier to receiving our education, which then becomes a barrier to receiving employment that will allow us to thrive rather than just survive. So we do get a lot of really positive feedback, and we're just pushing for people to complete the form, which at this point, the average completion time is about 10 minutes. But I think people feel so connected to it, which is great because that means we did our job right. We really heard what folks were saying. And this is yet another process for community to engage with. I will also say, while they're excited about the topics that are addressed in the equity priorities, they continue to raise, how are you going to get this done, and are you funded to do this? So they are raising both real operational questions to not only me, but as well as the core staff, because they're really excited to see this happen.
Yes, me too. I know you said you received some complaints already. Are you able to quantify the number of complaints that you have received with respect to agency operations?
Sure. So we have received inquiries that could potentially be a complaint. What we get from the public is, I have an issue with why we don't have a public hospital in Staten Island. Is this something that you can take on? And so with questions like that, we sort of talk through, well, how did we get here? What is it that you're thinking? What are the groups that you're working with? At this point in time, we don't have any complaint guidance on our website. We are not preventing anyone from emailing askcore@core.nyc.gov. However, we haven't received any formal complaints. I also want to note that even naming something a complaint is actually in itself a little bit of a tricky space, because we don't have a definition of a complaint in the charter that I'm aware of. And so that's one of the things that we want to work on as CORE. And we have not issued an official definition, in large part because when community members spoke with me when I first started, they said, we want to work with you to develop this particular area of work. Because of the nature of the work, I did want to wait until we had a general counsel on board so that we were aligning with actually what is mandated by law. Because again, remember, this particular mandate, we can't force an agency to do anything different. We are only able to hear what are the challenges communities are facing because of the conduct that they are experiencing by agencies. It is also clear that the burden of proof about racial disparities with respect to the complaint is actually not on the community member. They just have to tell us, this is what we're experiencing, and we think that this is going to cause an exacerbation of a racial disparity. And then CORE has to figure out what are the next steps, and community has said that they want to do that with CORE. So now that we have a general counsel on board, we are launching that area of work. And so what I hope is that in this next quarter, we'll be able to launch some guidance, and then we can come back to you in a year when we've had more interaction with the public to better understand what is the total number of complaints and what are the trends that we're seeing.
Thank you. Do you feel that CORE has sufficient resources to conduct whatever outreach is needed to ensure robust community engagement with the city's racial equity work?
I would say for FY24, I think we did a great job working with what for up until 2 days ago, actually up until yesterday, we had only a director of community organizing and engagement who's been absolutely amazing. We now have an associate with us, so now it's a team of 2. We will need additional staffing for that particular arm. We've got 5 boroughs in a city of 8 million people. I need additional folks to do an adequate amount of organizing and engagement and ensure that the public is truly being heard. And I think that that's a very critical part of the work that we're doing and why we were set up in the first place. This cannot look like traditional government engagement. This must be new, innovative. It must have young people at the table. And community members must feel and know not only that we hear them, but that we're working alongside them and we're creating the proper channels for their voices to be heard. And so for that, our staffing structure does have to look different than what maybe another agency or commission may look like. We will need more people, and we do have to institute innovative methods.
Thank you. Last but certainly not least question around my favorite topic, interagency coordination. Aside from any work with MOERJ, has CORE worked with or solicited feedback from any other New York City agency?
Yes, as we were drafting the community equity priorities, we presented at 2 interagency meetings that had representation from over, my understanding is certainly over 20 city agencies. Some of our larger city agencies included in that, so the Health Department, DOE, DYCD, and so we've been able to provide city staff also the opportunity to give us feedback on the draft community equity priorities and also tell us, based on their particular agency's content area, how do they feel the public is going to respond to these equity priorities? What were the recommendations they had to either shape the language, whether it's expand or maybe use other words? And I would say that that was a wonderful experience. We did get really great feedback. We also are working across city agencies to better understand what data is available so that we can do a deep dive into each of the equity priorities so that we can provide our commissioners with the robust information that they need. And we're continuing our interagency work. You know, one of the benefits to having both a chair and executive director that's been in government is that I've had the opportunity for the past 5 years to build great relationships across city agencies. All of my work in city government has focused on advancing equity and specific racial equity, whether it was working in education policy or mental health, and then also, of course, public health when I was at the health department. So I was able to reach out to people when I started this role and say, this is what we're working on. You know, what are some of the challenges that you think I may experience, and what are the ways in which we can work with your agency? And people were receptive, which was wonderful.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for your testimony. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing on behalf of all of us New Yorkers to advance racial equity, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you, you too.
And I think now we'll have public testimony. And I have a nice little public comment protocol to read. And so I now open the hearing up for public testimony. I want to remind members of the public that this is a government proceeding and that decorum shall be observed at all times. As such, members of the public shall remain silent at all times. The witness table is reserved for people who wish to testify. No video recording or photography is allowed from the witness table. Further, members of the public may not present audio or video recordings as testimony, but may submit transcripts of such recordings to the Sergeant-at-Arms for inclusion in the hearing record. If you wish to speak at today's hearing, please fill out an appearance card with the Sergeant-at-Arms and wait to be recognized. When recognized, you will have 2 minutes to speak on today's hearing topic. And we will, I have to say though, oh, this is flip side. This is the first time. This is a new protocol that I've had to read this. So if you have written statements or additional written testimony you wish to submit for the record, please provide a copy of that testimony to the Sergeant at Arms. You may also submit written testimony by email to testimony@council.nyc.gov within 72 hours of this hearing. Audio and video recordings will not be accepted. And now we'll call up, a very esteemed panel. Jennifer Jones Austin, Jimmy Pan, Michael, sorry, that's panel one, sorry. Got you, so just those two. Welcome, our former Racial Justice Commission friends. You're back again. Hello. Thank you for your patience in waiting to testify, the people who made all this happen.
Good afternoon, good morning. Not quite sure what time of day it is, but it is good to be with you, Chair Williams, and those committee members who were here, other distinguished members of the council. Really appreciate the opportunity to testify at this council hearing. And first and foremost, I just want to thank you for taking the time and giving attention to this critical issue. If we do not stay ever vigilant and engaged in this work, we know that it will not happen. I had the pleasure of serving as chair of the Racial Justice Commission. It was a privilege. It was a pleasure for the most part. It was a daunting task, but I'm glad that we got through it. And serving as chair, I had the privilege one day of talking with the former counsel to the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The former counsel said to me, very sage advice, very sage words. He said, always remember throughout your deliberations that those who created the system created it to persist. And I think we're seeing around the country right now, I shouldn't say I think, I know we're seeing what that means, what that looks like with the erosion of so many advancements that have been made over the course of the past 60 plus years. We're seeing them fall to the wayside, if you will. But New York is differently positioned because we have these measures now made law and in the New York City Charter. The New Yorkers have spoken and have said, we believe equity, racial equity, should be the foundational law for this city. So we're in a better place, and that gives me hope. I want to commend the City Council for doing its part. The city administration is responsible for implementing the racial measures that were passed by the City of New York, but the City Council has stepped up too. This hearing is an indication, the early hearing that you held, Chair Williams, but also the passage of those pieces of legislation to provide, to require that city employees and human service workers under contract with the City of New York receive annual anti-racism and bias training if they are going to work on behalf and in behalf of New Yorkers, especially those who've been made vulnerable. That legislation providing for training requirements is critical to ensure that they're showing up with the competency and the sincerity to do the work in ways that do not perpetuate harm. So I appreciate you all for stepping up and doing that work. I'll tell you that since the commission did its work pursuant to the laws of the City of New York, the commission no longer ceased to exist. However, I am privileged to serve along with 14 other persons, 4 of whom, in addition to myself, were commissioners on the mayor's Racial Justice Advisory Board. And serving on the board, I can attest that the city is working diligently to implement the measures that were passed. We are behind, I should say, the timelines that were set. Those timelines were set with a sense of urgency that something had to be done and quickly to get things going. But I appreciate that they're building a new infrastructure. They're resetting the foundation. And frankly, I'd rather them move slowly and cautiously than move with haste to meet a timeline and then not get it right. So I commend them for the work that they're doing. What I'll tell you is that at this stage of the implementation, even with the timelines extended well beyond the charter mandated timelines by as many as 18 months, As chair of the Racial Justice Commission, I'm most concerned about the city's adherence to the charter mandate for a true cost of living measure. Specifically, I'm most concerned about what costs the measure will include. During the RJC's community outreach phase, my fellow commissioners and I heard repeatedly from everyday New Yorkers, mostly persons of color, about their lived experiences, about how the measure, that if it's not capturing what they need, will ensure that they'll continue to struggle to get by and get ahead in a city where they can't even begin to plan for tomorrow because they're financially challenged to get through today. Their ability to live, to thrive, live with dignity, to be economically secure is getting harder and harder, even with college and graduate degrees. The Commission appreciated that existing measures, such as the official and supplemental poverty measures and the self-sufficiency standard, are tied to acute deprivation and basic needs, and do not capture adequately and accurately all costs necessary for individuals and families classified as low and middle income New Yorkers to get by, get ahead, and stay ahead. We propose to require the city to do something never done. The Commission envisioned a first-in-nation true cost of living measure that captures what it truly costs for individuals and families to live here in New York City and adequately meet their basic daily needs, plan for their futures, and save for rainy days. The ballot abstract text states that the new measurement is intended to focus on dignity rather than poverty, reflecting the intention to root in it economic security, what it costs to get by, get ahead, and stay ahead. Existing measures, including those aimed at providing a more accurate accounting of basic needs, such as the self-sufficiency standard, which I have worked with for more than 15 years while a senior leader at the United Way of New York City, and still today at FPWA, are not true cost of living measures, but rather measures centered in economic deprivation, acute economic deprivation. The Commission understood this, and that's why we proposed the creation and utilization of a new measure, one that would capture the true cost of living today and for tomorrow, and that would have the greatest potential in aiding in the undoing of structural economic deprivation. The danger of measures that only track basic needs is that they have the effect of disproportionately harming both low and middle income New Yorkers who have lower incomes and less assets due to structural racism. When government only tracks basic needs, it inhibits an individual and family's ability to build wealth and achieve economic security by disregarding the cost of the many forms of debt and the costs associated with retirement, family needs beyond childcare, and emergent costs. For New Yorkers working to get ahead, especially those whose opportunities have been diminished by structural and institutional racism, the city must select as its true cost of living measure a new measure that captures both present-day daily costs, including debt of different types, especially for those classified as poor and middle income, and costs associated with saving for tomorrow and building wealth. This would allow our city to see and understand the full, complex financial picture of New Yorkers who are struggling to move beyond basic needs. Doing anything less than a true cost of living measure undercuts not only the intent of the past measure in its design, but also in its results. I implore the mayor and the city council to do nothing less than effect a fully realized true cost of living measure, which to date has not been put forward, has not been offered up by any city or nonprofit organization here in New York City, despite what you may have heard. Fortunately, New Yorkers' passage of the true cost of living measure, with a whopping 81% of the electorate voting in favor, created the spark that ignited a conversation about what it truly costs to live and to measure economic security and financial resiliency for Americans classified as low income and also as middle income, who may be comfortable from day to day, but still are financially precarious because they can't save and plan for the expected and the unexpected. What happened? In 2023, my organization, the organization I lead, FPWA, and the Community Service Society launched a nationwide coalition to effect a national true cost of living measure, and we commissioned the renowned Urban Institute to create the measure. The Urban Institute is in the final stages of developing a measure that will calculate the true cost of living, both county by county. That means here in New York City, borough by borough, and then for the country overall. New York can learn and benefit directly from the Urban Institute's work, which is unprecedented, and just as was the case with the Racial Justice Commission, be the vanguard for the nation in calculating the true cost of living securely and with dignity. I do commend the progress of the Adams administration in working towards fulfilling the charter revisions, but I also exhort the administration to act with both a sense of urgency spurred by the charter-imposed timelines and a sense of loyalty to the desires of all New York City citizens and their families who are seeking a more equitable and inclusive and secure life, as their votes demonstrated. The system may have been created to persist, but with the implementation of these charter revisions in the right way, dare I say the righteous way, New Yorkers have instructed their government to push back in this moment and forevermore. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Good afternoon, Council. Is that better? Hi, I'm Jimmy Pan, he, him. I served as the Policy Director for the Racial Justice Commission, and after the Racial Justice Commission closed down, returned to the administration to help stand up the ballot measures. I'm primarily here to be able to answer questions about the ballot measures, but I also do want to make a few points reflecting on what I've heard today that I think are important, not just for the council, but for the administration to take into account as well. So appreciating the difficulty of transforming government and appreciating the desire to get it right rather than rushing ahead, I do want to point out that New Yorkers do care about timelines, and it is a matter of whether they trust their government or not. Certainly I can attest to us being on the Racial Justice Commission and people testifying, but also expressing significant doubt about whether government would ever truly move forward, even if these things passed. And I think as we continue to push timelines back, we're really asking New Yorkers to trust us more and more without giving them something to work with. So I would certainly implore council to continue having hearings like this to create accountability, which again is helping the administration understand the importance of this, but also that the administration can recognize that this is something that they should really think about the role of government in fostering trust and how many communities have been let down continuously over decades in hearing promises from government and not seeing that realized. And I also note that there's a simultaneous charter revision commission that's happening right now that purports to again, have voters come to the ballots and change the law. And I would just urge the administration to think about what it means to delay the production of the past charter revision commission and ask New Yorkers now to vote upon a new set of ballot measures. I would also take this opportunity to urge council members and the speaker to think about, as we crest Juneteenth, what is council going to do about creating a racial justice infrastructure in the council itself too? There are jurisdictions around the US that have both an executive branch infrastructure and a legislative infrastructure. And as you alluded to earlier, Chair, it is very important that council has a framework to think about the impacts of the laws, to think about what's prioritized when it comes to voting on different measures, and to really understand the ultimate effect of the actions that council is going to take. Every institution needs to understand what it's doing and what it's prioritizing and have a strategy for actually making these results happen. That's why the Mayor's Office of Equity and Racial Justice spent a lot of time building the infrastructure for agencies to understand how they're going to make a long-term impact and not be reactive to the issues of the day. I think council would really benefit from a similar set of processes and really expert staff that help council members and council leadership really understand how to make lasting change and also internally operate fairly and with a mind towards focusing on the things that really matter to New Yorkers. I want to speak a little bit to your point about OMB's role in all this. And certainly, my experience working in the mayor's office for a long time is that while OMB plays a very major role, I think the mayor's office of Equity and Racial Justice does have an opportunity to change how we do budgeting in the city. As you correctly pointed out, it can be very opaque, and questions about how agencies are funded relative to one another or why a program is selected over another, it can be opaque in the city as well. I would just suggest that one thing that council could do as it's negotiating budgets to help Mayor's Office of Equity and Racial Justice do this work is to continually ask the question of, when these budget proposals are mentioned, has MOERJ weighed in on this? Does it comport with the framework that they've put forward? How does this align with the anti-marginalization agenda that we've heard about, et cetera, right? Just as an example, I think council does have a role to play in making sure that OMB is consistently understanding that these criteria are things that New Yorkers care about and therefore their council members care about as well. Lastly, I would just quickly address your point about whether an agency is advancing equity or not, or whether they should have their funding move somewhere else. My personal theory is that every agency has a role to play in equity. I just, in my work in city government, I don't see one agency as pro-equity and another agency as anti-equity. I think part of what the Mayor's Office of Equity and Racial Justice is really trying to do is help every agency understand their role. Of course, if they're not meeting their goals, if they're not closing disparities, if they're not allocating resources the right way, I think that really should be a major consideration for the administration. But I want to push back a little bit for your consideration and for the administration's consideration that every agency, no matter how big or small, actually has a meaningful and major role to play in our society, and they can all work towards justice. So those are just some quick points, and I'm here for questions.
Thank you. I appreciate the testimony. I guess, do you feel that MOERJ and CORE are on the right track per the testimony you heard today?
I believe that they are moving in the right direction. The challenge that we have is that this work is unprecedented in many respects. New York City is the first large municipality to attempt something of this type. And so, as we all know and appreciate, the results of your efforts are influenced by design and by implementation. And we have yet to see what the effects are, because we're not yet fully through the design and the implementation. I do believe that it's critically important that the structural foundation be reset in ways that help us to appreciate what are the levers of government that will have the greatest impact in bringing about racial justice and equity for all of New York City. And the Mayor's Office of Equity and Racial Justice is centering on that. As Mr. Pan, I'm used to calling him Jimmy, and he, me, Jennifer, as he's talked about, budgeting is critical. And it's not just kind of budgeting coming in at the last minute, but how each of these agencies, every one of these agencies, looks at their work and their role and responsibility in advancing equity as foundational and core is key. I have not had the benefit of sitting in on the training, so I can't tell you, how they're helping to develop a shared language, understanding, appreciation for how you live and breathe equity. So, I, like many people, are waiting to see what this first set of racial equity plans looks like. I do believe the sincerity of heart is there on the part of Commissioner Sherman and her team, and also with respect to Executive Director Tajani and her commissioners. So I'm hopeful. I stay very close. They can tell you I stay very close. I don't let up. And Chair Williams, you know me, I don't let up about anything that I care about, and I care about people in this city, and especially those who've been marginalized. So again, they have to control for the consequences that are intended and the consequences that aren't intended. I think that they are working very diligently to lay the right foundation, but there are a lot of challenges along the way. I will tell you that, I'll just be very candid and tell you that I think that the measures provide for New York City the justification to go, to do. And there are moments when I felt like the city has not leaned in, having been given the mandate to the fullest extent that it could. That's not to say that there aren't hardworking people in the administration, but it hasn't been essentially given the prominence that I think it justly deserves, especially in this moment.
I would echo that. Certainly having worked alongside Chief Equity Officer Sherman and having known Chair Tajani and seen her hard work, I think what they've offered here today before the council is a very compelling vision of racial equity in government that I actually don't see articulated anywhere else in the country to this extent. So I think that if they're able to actualize what they've put forward here, I think that'd be a really great thing, not just for New Yorkers, but eventually the country. As Jennifer, the chair, has mentioned, speed is a function often of how many resources the administration has given to a body, right? I don't really want to talk about any person or think about what could have happened, but to the point just made a moment ago, people voted for these things overwhelmingly. I think that is a mandate for permission to say, actually, this administration should unlock every barrier, should devote every resource, should celebrate when wins happen, and claim that mantle of leading racial equity in the city and true transformation. So I would urge the administration to move forward with all deliberate speed, or all full speed, and the council should keep hounding on that. But yes, I think it's in the right direction.
Thank you. One of the things I've seen in the agencies that this committee has oversight of is, these are the agencies that really have been designed to provide resources and uphold the rights of all, right? Civil and human rights, and now racial equity, now Office of Equity and Racial Justice, and these have typically been agencies that have been significantly underfunded, and also don't necessarily have the prominence. I like that you use that word. I mentioned like being empowered within city government to conduct their work. And so I don't know if you have any additional thoughts on that, because my concern, and this is like a future concern because I know they're still standing up their work, but when I look at EEPC, that has been in existence for some time, when I look at CCHR, that has also been in existence for some time, while they are doing a lot of amazing things, their ability to, I think, do what is intended for them to do at maximum level, because we can always do like things at minimum level, but to do things at maximum level has really never been achieved. And specifically with EEPC, their ability to truly hold agencies accountable and for agencies to respect the work that they're doing also is something that, from my vantage point, has not been realized. And so just wondering, if you have any additional thoughts on, because you don't work for the mayor's administration, and I understand sometimes it's very difficult for individuals who are commissioners to speak frankly on the record about, their internal positionality and voice and influence amongst both within executive level city government, but also trickling down to the smallest agencies we have. And so, do you think, and just to follow up on that point, do you think that these agencies have been properly prioritized and that the administration, not the folks who testified today, because although I am looking at them holistically, except for CORE a little bit because they're independent, you know, I understand there's nuance, and I understand that while their intent, Commissioner Sherman's intent, is also impacted by politics, it's also impacted by priority of the mayor, and so outside of and removing, you know, the commissioner and the executive director who's still here, do you feel like the administration has properly prioritized execution on the ballot measures that were passed?
So I'll begin by sharing that it was critically important that this work be done as part of the mayor's office to create this sense and appreciation that this is administration-wide, it is citywide, it is cross-cutting. Very important that this work and that the leadership of these offices report to a deputy mayor. That deputy mayor must be empowered to work across city agencies and to have them be accountable to the deputy mayor, along with the Mayor's Office of Equity, for implementation of said of all the work related to implementing these measures. If that deputy mayor is not empowered to move things and move them at the speed and with deliberation as they need be, then we have a challenge. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, I think it's very important for us to never forget that what is at the core of structural racism is economic deprivation. Racism, misogyny, sexism are all tools that were created to perpetuate structural economic deprivation and structural inequity when it comes to power. And so we have to make sure that as this city moves to build out these measures, that they're not just looking at it as though they're like Band-Aid racial equity plans that are put on top of what agencies and offices are already doing. An example that I will provide for you is every year we sit around and we talk about what is happening in Human Resources Administration, in the Department of Homeless. We talk about Homeless Services. We talk about what the Administration of Children's Services is doing or not doing. And we look at all these agencies as being in place to actually move people beyond poverty and cure their challenges, the challenges that present in their families and in their households. When we know good and well that these agencies have been stood up to treat and respond to the problem, but they're not there actually curing the problem. And curing the problems has to do everything with how do you get at the structural root of the problems, which in many instances is structural economic deprivation. So if we do not have workforce, right? The Office of Workforce Development, and I'm not just talking about giving people jobs that pay minimum wage, but if we don't have the city centered on how we cure economic deprivation, occupation segregation, and all of the other ills that attend to building true economic security, we talk, Jimmy and I, about wealth. You know, I'm not talking about Jeff Bezos' wealth, but if we don't work to ensure that people have, and that's why the true cost of living is so critically important to me. That's a baseline. If we as a city go on pretending that we can just do equity by making sure we don't pull as many families apart in ACS, and we're providing them with like basic supports, but we're not looking at what has caused their challenges in the first place and how it's tied to acute economic deprivation in many instances, we're not doing real equity work. And so that was long, but I think you know where I'm going, and it was important that that fundamentally, if we're doing real racial equity work in this city, it's not just how many stops we prevent that should never have happened. That's critically important. But we have to tie all of this to underlying structural racism and gender inequities and other that are based in structural economic deprivation, and come at it from that frame.
I would agree with that and say that all of the ballot measures are ultimately geared towards that. Even if it's not apparent on the surface, if you read the preamble, if you look at what the racial equity plans required, if you think about the true cost of living, they all speak to that economic security and economic dignity for all families in New York City. Right? That's what's at the root of so many of these issues and at the root of so much disinvestment. So I'd agree and say, of course, that work is extremely difficult, and we've never gotten close to that in this country or in this city. But that's also why accountability is hard for all government leaders because it would illuminate how much progress we need to make on that compared to how many band-aids we've tried to throw on the issue. So of course, all accountability agencies, independent bodies that are meant to monitor these things are by nature, they're not going to be a priority for funding because it actually shines a spotlight
That's right.
on how we're failing families. I would just say the council certainly can recognize this issue and perhaps even coordinate some of these bodies that are meant to provide accountability and also set an example for being held accountable. You know, my theory is accountability is actually helpful, even though it feels very painful. We all need to be held accountable because that's what keeps us on the ball. And when it comes to an issue that's as deep-rooted and as long-lasting and as intractable as economic insecurity and economic injustice, I think we really need to amp that up.
And that's why the true cost of living, a true cost of living, is so vital. Nothing less will do in this moment.
Thank you both so much. I don't know if you have anything else you want to share for the record, but I appreciate you waiting to testify and for all you've shared and for the work you continue to do on behalf of New Yorkers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now I'll call up Michael Matos and Sharon Brown Jeter. Sorry, we're over here opining on what people are saying in real time. You can begin.
Good afternoon, council members and my fellow New Yorkers. My name is Michael Matos, and I serve as the Chief Executive Officer of Personal Protective Concepts, a personal safety company. We teach marginalized communities how to protect themselves from harm using the experience of U.S. military veterans. So you can imagine why I'm here testifying in support of a federally implemented Transgender Bill of Rights. Personal Protective Concepts was founded after a group of Black trans activists reached out to me, concerned for their personal safety and seeking self-defense education. Their courage and their determination highlighted the urgent need for comprehensive protections for the transgender community. The United States prides itself on freedom and equality, but many transgender individuals face discrimination, violence, and systematic barriers. It is imperative that we take steps to rectify these injustices. A Transgender Bill of Rights is a vital legal framework ensuring protection against discrimination in employment, housing, healthcare, and public accommodations. It affirms the right of transgender individuals to self-identify and be recognized without fear. While I am proud to continue leading Personal Protective Concepts as its CEO, imagine how wonderful it would be if we lived in a society that didn't need our services. This bill is not just about protection, it is about affirmation. It affirms that transgender individuals are valued members of our society who deserve respect and opportunities. It shows that the United States stands for equity, justice, and dignity for all its citizens. I urge you to support the Transgender Bill of Rights. It is a necessary step towards a more inclusive, fair, and just society. Let us lead by example and commit to protecting the rights and lives of all Americans, regardless of gender identity. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Sharon Brown Jeter. Okay, the first thing I would like to say...
Is your mic on? Do you know?
Yes, it's
Okay,
on.
cool,
Can
cool,
you
cool.
hear me? My name is Sharon Brown Jeter. The first thing I would like to say is release the hostages, let Yahweh's people go, defend Israel. Remember Israel with whatever you're doing in your day, every day. Okay, the racial justice, we need to stop including the false data about race in medical and other instances. Then years later, they say it was false, it's not accurate, and they have infighting among the races when they cite things that are not true, and then they have to go later on television and say, well, we have a new finding. We need to place a sign to identify New York's first Black slave market. I believe it's necessary Shirley Chisholm Day needs to be November 30th. I would like to get on the ballot as the first black president, and I believe that we should cite Shirley Chisholm. When I was at church many years ago, someone prophesied to me that I would be like Shirley Chisholm, and that's coming to pass. I'm trying to get on the ballot, and eventually that will be reality. The federal government can't have a pedophilia transgender bill. It is Islamic in nature. The Prophet Muhammad married a 6-year-old and waited till she was 9-year-old to have sex with her. Now, in that instance, they could take a 6-year-old and change their sex to a girl to a boy, and then they can say that this child is not a girl, it's a boy. And these transgender are against our Judeo-Christian values of what we stand for. This is why I first said, release the hostages, let Yahweh's people go, defend Israel. It goes against our views, Judeo-Christian.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate your testimony. Have a good day.
Yeah.
Just want to say for the record, I'm not sure how true that comment was around changing genders at that age, but I'm not an expert. But thank you so much for your testimony. Thank you. Oh, we have one last panel. Rajim Kamel Mera. Are you still here? And did I say your last name correctly?
Rajesh Kamal Mera.
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 Okay, welcome. And Karen Davis. Karen has left the building. Karen has left the building. Ha ha ha. It's a little joke.
My name is Rajesh Mera, and I'm a public servant. More specifically, I'm the senior most licensed creative arts therapist at Rikers Island Correctional Facility, where I've provided therapeutic care to marginalized populations for over a decade now. I'm here today to speak in my personal capacity on behalf of the transgender and non-binary individuals who I serve, who are often the most vulnerable and overlooked within our correctional systems. At Rikers, I witnessed the profound impact that incarceration has on transgender and non-binary people. They are disproportionately represented within our correctional systems, often due to systemic discrimination and marginalization that happens long before they enter our facilities. In years past, back when there was punitive segregation units by name, to me, it seemed like these individuals were overrepresented in that context as well. When serving their Bing time, if they were let out of their cells at all to participate in my sessions, it was under the condition of having one arm shackled to a table and one ankle shackled to the floor, regardless of whether they had any history of any sort of violence. These kinds of punitive measures only exacerbate the trauma and stigmatization that many have faced throughout their entire lives. The carceral environment inherently de-identifies and dehumanizes individuals, but the impact is especially severe for those who already struggle with societal affirmation. Transgender and non-binary individuals, particularly those who are also people of color, face compounded layers of discrimination. This intersectionality must be acknowledged and addressed in our policies and practices. The absence of certain legal protections for transgender and non-binary people perpetuates a cycle of discrimination and incarceration. Without access to appropriate medical care, safe housing, and economic security, many are left vulnerable to criminalization simply for trying to survive. The proposed Transgender Bill of Rights is a crucial step in addressing these injustices. We must recognize that the marginalization of transgender and non-binary people is not just an issue of individual prejudice, but a systemic failure that our government has a duty to correct. By supporting this resolution, we affirm our commitment to human rights and dignity for all people. Thank you. For all people, regardless of gender identity. As a therapist, I strive to create sessions that stand in stark contrast to the rigid, restrictive, and binary nature of the carceral setting by creating spaces where individuals feel seen, valued, and affirmed. This approach, based on an affirmative therapy model, recognizes and celebrates the unique identities of transgender and non-binary individuals. It is essential that our laws reflect the same commitment to affirmation and respect. Incarceration should not strip anyone of their humanity. The Transgender Bill of Rights is essential to ensuring that transgender and non-binary individuals are treated with the respect and dignity that they deserve. It will help to reduce the overrepresentation of these individuals in our criminal justice system and provide the foundation for them to lead safe, healthy, and fulfilling lives. I urge you to support this resolution, and thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. And a person who knows quite a few transgender people, personally, I appreciate the testimony, and I was just kidding. It appears we have one more person that would like to testify. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
And we'll bring Andrew up. And just something else I want to say for the record, while I agree we definitely need to release all hostages, we also should be calling for peace in that region and for a ceasefire. So I just want to also state that for the record and welcome up Mr. Andrew. Police are making people homeless. Okay.
That is a court case, by the way. Oh. Can you hear me now? Yes. Okay, good. This is a court case right here in New York City, so police can't deny that this is not true, that they do not make people homeless, because this is a court case. Thank you for your time. I would like to petition the city council members to do an investigation of police for attacking me in New York and Chicago. What they done was they assaulted me in 2 different states. They put me in the hospital with bodily injuries. And in New York City, they tossed me in the sidewalk against my will. So during my investigation, I found out that people are identified as being crazy who have evidence against covered people in law enforcement. Los Angeles police officer Christopher Dorner, he's one. New York City police officer Adrian Schoolcraft, and Nella Gomez, police detective, New York City police detective Nella Gomez. Everybody that have evidence against police, they identified as being crazy. So I have evidence against them, so I'm falling into the same category as being a crazy person, running around killing people, doing all these sorts of wild things. So I'm asking for like an investigation because they're making a false claim against me, and people who are accused falsely by law enforcement that have no avenues as to where to go to defend themselves. Because I tried to sue them in both states, they blocked me from suing them. And this lady from Chicago, she too had exposed law enforcement, and they had slashed her tires, they had threatened to kill her. So corrupt people in law enforcement, they like to do bad things to people, and they're attacking me. So instead of me acting well, I come and I speak to people, and I talk to everybody, and I let them know, how do you think I should handle the situation of being attacked and terrorized by corrupt people in law enforcement? So I just talk to people. So that's why I come here asking for an investigation of law enforcement. And thank you for your time.
Thank you for your time, and I definitely encourage you, if you haven't already, to file a complaint to CCRB. Court can also take complaints about agencies. The commission, the Commission on Racial Equity that I spoke today. So I just encourage you to reach out to the proper channels to lodge your complaint. Okay. Well, I'll come talk to you. So this, I believe, if there are no other individuals here to testify, this hearing is concluded.